Bodacious, a podcast about finally reading Thomas Pynchon. My name is Patrick Fiorilli, and I'm joined, as always, by Andrew Tillett.
Morning, Patrick.
And Duri Long.
Good morning.
I forgot to say good morning at the start of this.
You've always said good evening, which I think is nice for the listeners, I guess, even though we've often recorded in the morning. But I'm going to guess most of these people are downloading this at like 7 a.m. before they drive to work.
My intention behind this was to kind of welcome people to our, our little literary salon, as it were. Sort of an, oh, thank you for coming in. Good evening.
It's definitely more cozy. It's got kind of a, like the FDR fireside chat feel.
But you know what? I've messed it up this time, and there's no going back now. These are not the
kind. This is morning in the salon.
Morning in the salon.
We're having coffee.
Hello. You're finally awake? Welcome to Pynchon, pals. We've been expecting you. On this morning's episode, we are discussing Chapter 7 of Thomas Pynchon's V. This is subtitled She Hangs on the Western Wall. This is our longest chapter by far, I believe, thus far. It comprises the singular topic of our conversation today. Of course, as always, we have read this for the first time, and whether or not you are also reading this for the first time, or whether you're a V veteran, thank you for joining us on today's discussion. Point of order here: we have now officially all seen One Battle After Another. Stay tuned at the end of this recording for a little discussion about that. I imagine we will hit on sort of more detailed thoughts when we get to Vineland itself. This is the movie by Paul Thomas Anderson, not Thomas Pynchon, based on the novel Vineland by Thomas Pynchon. Inspired by, as the credits tell us, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Benicio del Toro and Chase Infinity. So we'll chat about that a little bit towards the end of the episode. But for now, why don't we get started with Chapter 7? So I'll start off, as always, with a sort of gloss of the chapter as a whole, and then we will dive into each of its sections and talk through them one by one. But since this chapter is a little bit of a more cohesive narrative through line, albeit one that jumps across to, as we've seen before, lots of different characters and places and events and philosophies, I feel that it probably makes sense to just go through it all at once, which I'll do now. Dudley Eigenvalue, DDS, is a renowned practitioner of psychodontia, the combination of Freudian psychiatry and dentistry. Herbert Stenzel has tracked him down through his association with the V plot and now regales him with impressions of the conspiracy, this one taking place during the month of April 1899. Evan Godolphin, here a chubby ne'er-do-well, recently expelled from Dartmouth, comes to Florence at the behest of his father Hugh, the famous explorer. He sings to a beautiful woman passing by, none other than Victoria Wren, disowned from her family and lately arrived after breaking things off with Goodfellow. Meanwhile, two men, Raphael Mantissa and Cesare, seek the help of the Gaucho, a mysterious political agitator, to steal Botticelli's Birth of Venus from the Uffizi Gallery, where, quote, she hangs on the western wall. Their complex plan, involving a potted tree with a hollowed-out trunk, is interrupted by the Gaucho's arrest at the orders of the Venezuelan consulate, under suspicion of his, in point of fact, true involvement with a long-simmering Venezuelan uprising in the city. Following a confused interrogation led by the English spy Sidney Stenzel, the Gaucho shares a jail cell with Evan, who was arrested after breaking into his father's apartment in search of Hugh's cryptic clues about something called Visu. They're soon set free. Hugh, for his part, by chance, encounters Victoria and confesses to her the secrets of Visu, which he claims is an extremely remote mystical society he visited only once, but whose unfathomable powers haunt him and indeed may threaten the world at large. As Sidney Stenzel reflects on the ceaseless flux of this and every situation, capital S, having learned nothing from the Gaucho about his real quarry, Visu, most of the other characters convene at yet another German beer garden. Hugh Godolphin and Mantissa are apparently old buddies, and the latter agrees to help the former escape the city after the heist. Victoria and Evan tag along, but when the Gaucho incites the Venezuelan riot, Victoria, transfixed by the carnage, stays put. Mantissa calls off the heist midway through, and they manage to escape despite being caught by Sidney, who reveals that his superiors have called off the whole investigation anyway. Evan, Hugh, and Mantissa drift away on their escape barge as Cesare walks off into the night. That being said, what are our first impressions of this chapter? It's a different one.
Really enjoyed this chapter.
Big fan.
It was a rollicking adventure. I felt like I was in a like Ocean's 11 or Jason Bourne movie. There was a heist. There were chases. There was an interrogation. There was a unrest. There was a lot going on. It was definitely an adventure.
Yeah, you definitely get sort of like an Indiana Jones searching for this mythical city that is in the mountains or in Antarctica or maybe in Africa.
Or maybe in a complex network of tunnels crisscrossing the entire globe.
Exactly. I think the first time that we had to sit through a gauntlet of Stencil's impersonations, I was not a huge fan compared to some of the other chapters. They're sort of contemporary chapters about Profane, but I really had a good time in chapter 7.
Yeah, I feel like our cast of characters really came together. I feel like Stencil meets the Victoria Wren crew. We finally figure out who Eigenvalue DDS is. I feel like things start to connect. Yeah,
this definitely feels, in a way, and I promise I'm not just saying this because in some way this resembles a V shape, but the two parallel threads, I think, of this book, the Profane stuff and the Stencil stuff, they crisscross, obviously, but they are more discrete and, I guess, tonally different than I was necessarily anticipating when I read, like, the back cover, the jacket copy of this book that says, like, we have two protagonists, and one of them is off doing this, and the other is this man of international intrigue and espionage, Herbert Stencil, who's looking for this mystical V. And the way that these parallel threads develop, again, really tonally and formally distinctively, I think has been kind of surprising to me. But I've found myself really enjoying both Chapter 3 and Chapter 7 here. Should we start off with, as you just mentioned, Duri, our new acquaintance, Dudley Eigenvalue, DDS, the what is the denomination here? The psychodentist?
Psychodontia, yeah.
Psychodontia is the name of his exciting new paradigm in medicine.
Which is, by the way, just a Pynchon thing. I did some Googling to see if psychodontia was something that existed.
To find psychodentists in your area?
Yeah, does that exist beyond Thomas Pynchon? And the answer is no.
I went to ZocDoc.com, but I could not find a single psychodentist willing to take my insurance.
4 out of 5 psychodentists agree that this is... Couldn't come up with an ending for that joke.
So we had met, we didn't really meet Eigenvalue before, but...
We've seen his name.
We've seen his name when, I'm forgetting who it was.
It was Charisma.
Charisma, yes, was complaining kind of about his teeth and kept saying, like, Eigenvalue. And we didn't really know what he was talking about, and now here we are. We meet Eigenvalue.
So, Eigenvalue...
Yeah, what is psychodontia? Should we unpack that for the listeners?
Please explain, Duri.
Sure.
Oh dear, I signed myself up for explaining that. Yeah, it sort of seems like a mixture between like psychoanalysis a la Freud and dentistry, in which he maps things like the id and the ego and the superego to different parts of the mouth.
Teeth parts,
Teeth parts. He says the pulp is soft and laced with little blood vessels and nerves, and he relates that to the id. The enamel, mostly calcium, is inanimate, and he relates that to the superego. And then he says the hard, lifeless eye covered up the warm, pulsing it, protecting and sheltering. Do either of you have more knowledge of psychoanalysis than I do.
Andrew, go ahead.
I was going to say, not a ton. I mean, I know sort of the id, ego, and ego, which he doesn't even give Pynchon or Dudley, does not go far enough to explain the part of the tooth that he thinks the ego is. But yeah, the id is your sort of unconscious source of need, your impulses. Your superego is your sort of back and forth with sort of cultural and ethical rules. And then your ego is the sort of interface between those, is my understanding.
Yeah, so this is a thing that Freud develops over a number of years, beginning with this idea of a division between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, that division in two, which Freud later develops into this division between the ego and the id, as Andrew just said, the id being this powerful, whirling vortex of desire, both toward pleasure and toward death. This is where you get like the pleasure principle in Freud, where you also get the death drive and the drive toward masochism. At the same time, you have the ego, which is constraining all of those desires or finding appropriate outlets for them, given the strictures and cultural norms that you have inherited as part of this superego layer, many of which come from, in a very Freudian way, your relationship with your parents, or even just the essential biological fact of having parents. So you have this biological id that is constrained and directed by an ego that is informed by culturally mediated superego.
And according to eigenvalue, this is all embodied in our teeth.
This is all embodied in our teeth, according to eigenvalue.
What do you think the commentary that Thomas Pynchon is making here on dentistry as a profession?
Yeah, I mentioned last time that teeth, in my limited readings of Pynchon and my limited biographical readings of Pynchon, teeth come up a lot.
Yeah, I guess we've had our teeth shaving by Ploy.
Yeah, we have Ploy's teeth shavings already.
We have a couple biting incidents.
For Ploy to be, I guess, cutting away his enamel with the teeth shaving is to be cutting away the superego. So now you're just left with your sort of baseline needs. No, you've sort of cut the angel on your shoulder away and you're just left with the devil.
You're like not beholden to society.
Which is sort of visible, I think, in Ploy's id-fueled rampage at the sailor's grave way back when, just like biting waitresses on the rear end and whatnot. Interestingly enough, though, in Ploy's case, he is also given a new set of hardened metallic enamel by the United States Navy that he feels is, in a way that I'm just now realizing resembles what ends up happening to one Evan Godolphin's face, this foreign body reaction that he rebels against these metal teeth that the Navy has fitted him with.
And in fact, Dr. Eigenvalue has metal teeth mounted in his office. It says mounted on black velvet in a locked mahogany case. Showpiece of the office was a set of false dentures, each tooth a different precious metal. And the upper right canine was pure titanium. So he even has metal teeth sort of mounted on his wall, along with like a variety of other. He seems to have a wide array of sort of dentistry paraphernalia, historical paraphernalia in his office. I had to look up some names later on, but he has a pair of forceps once handled by Fauchard, which is Pierre Fauchard, father of modern dentistry. He has the first edition of The Surgeon Dentist, a chair sat in by patients of Chapin Aaron Harris, who was the founder of Dentistry School, a brick from one of the first buildings of the Baltimore College of Dental Surgery. So he has this mahogany case, which has all of this sort of historical dental paraphernalia in it.
Little cabinet of curiosities. I mean, in some ways, Pynchon's insistence on recounting and accounting for all of this memorabilia, this like fetishization of historical artifacts, resembles, I think, Pynchon's own interest in having a bunch of referentiality in his texts. In as much as there is a social or aesthetic value for someone like Eigenvalue to have this beautiful mahogany cabinet with all of these interesting things in it, Pynchon seems to believe in the aesthetic value of having those kinds of artifacts and cultural allusions and references as part of the textual apparatus in his writing, which I think is interesting. He keeps coming up with characters who are obsessed with little details and odds and ends and bits and facts and trivia, and connecting them all into a grand organizing structure, which is in some ways a thing that he is doing with his own novels.
I also feel like he talks about like little inanimate things a lot. It's almost like waste, or talks about, you know, little inanimate chess sets being melted down to be like parts of people's faces, or people, you know, picturing themselves as being made up of all of these little bits and odds and ends. So I feel like there might also be something there with our inanimate animate connection, and this idea of sort of all of the like little bits and bobs and waste that we generate.
Yeah, I think there's also something going on here with, you know, what is the cliche about dentists when you go to see one for either a routine or a specialty procedure is that they chit-chat you and ask you a bunch of questions while they're poking around in your mouth, and of course you can't reply to any of them. And so I feel like there's a double sort of joke going on here, that Pynchon is imagining that exact scenario as being kind of a psychoanalytic encounter where a dentist is asking you a bunch of questions that you can't actually respond to, but in this very way, it is revealing of a kind of unconscious desire in the mode of psychoanalysis that is trying to bring to the conscious mind all of these unconscious anxieties and angst and hang-ups.
Well, the dental chair is not altogether different from the type of chair that you would sit in sort of a psychoanalysis
the analyst's
room.
couch, yeah.
You're sort of laying back, and instead of you sort of droning on and on, you've got your analyst droning on and on to you.
Yeah, but it is also a case, as we see in many of the kind of introductory scenes to the chapters in this book, that it is over pretty quickly. We move on from psychodontia fairly soon after we're introduced to it. I do want to point out, just for our own sake in the future, that we've seen this name, Clayton Bloody Chiclets, a couple of times throughout the text, and he reappears again here. Chiclets of Yoyodyne, one of the biggest defense contractors on the East Coast with subsidiaries all over the country. He and Eigenvalue were part of the same circle. That's circle with capital C, of course. That was what the enthusiast Stencil said and believed.
The whole sixth circle.
Yeah, the sixth circle that Stencil is kind of trying to circumscribe. And it is interesting, once again, as we move into, I guess, main narrative of this chapter, that once again we are confronted with the indeterminacy of Stencil's recollection or understanding of the events that are relayed here. And in this case, we are given sort of an outsider's perspective through Eigenvalue, who thinks that this Stencil character is maybe
buffoon.
Yeah, an absolute buffoon, totally grasping at straws, like, what is the expression? Like seeing something where there isn't something.
Can I hop back to Chiclets real quick?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I also have something I want to say about Chiclets. Go ahead, Duri.
Yeah, great name. Where did we see Chiclets before?
Oh, you're going to make me do some flipping.
Yeah, while you flip, one thing I noticed about Chiclets was that they talk about him being one of the biggest defense contractors and is in this like same circle as Eigenvalue the dentist. And I feel like this connection between the sort of military and medical is one that we saw earlier with Godolphin, and how the sort of plastic surgery kind of grew out of military related needs.
I just wanted to make a comment. The company name Yoyodyne, obviously Benny is described several instances as a human yo-yo, but I also think it's funny the idea that you shoot a gun, drop a bomb, launch a missile, and like a yo-yo comes back to you. You don't want your missile doing a U-turn and coming back. So I just think that's a very humorous name from
for a
boy Thomas.
Contractor.
Yes, and I don't want to spoil too much, but this may not be the last time we encounter the name Yoyodyne.
Bum, bum, bum.
Pynchon pals out there who are more informed and us on this podcast may know what I'm talking about. We'll get there when we get there. I'm still trying to find where Chiclets actually appears in the text. I mentioned it on a previous episode, so maybe
it's definitely come up. He's on the first page of chapter 8. Like he's in the opening sentence of the next chapter.
I did not remember Chiclets.
Duri, you mentioned during our last recording that you'd read some of this chapter already. And
I had read the whole thing.
When I started reading this, it was absolutely blowing my mind that you had sat there and while we talked about the alligator patrol, thinking about this chapter.
I know. I tried really hard to not bring it up in the previous episode. I read the whole thing together because I had a trip and I read on the airplane. But yeah, I think in future weeks, I'll be reading just prior to the episode because I feel like I was too tempted to talk about the future.
I did find it. Thank y'all for vamping for a little bit as I continued flipping. So this is in chapter 2. Stencil is sitting on the sink at the Whole Sick Crew party, the image we keep returning to.
Great scene.
And he's talking about the friends and acquaintances of the contacts that his father had left him in all of these various journals. At each step, the sense of blood weakened. Stencil could see a day when he would only be tolerated. It would then be he and V all alone in a world that somehow had lost sight of them both. Until such time, there were Schoenmacher to wait for, and Chiclets the munitions king, and Eigenvalue the physician, epithets characteristically stemming from Sidney's day, though Sidney had known neither of the men personally to fill up the time. So we're introduced to these characters as figures that Stencil the Younger is following up on based on their names coming up in some of these journals.
Yeah, I think really Stencil mentions at this point, it's been so long that he's sort of following up with the sons or the friends of the people who show up in his father's notes. But like in this case, with the surgeon, whose name I've forgotten, he's following up.
Schoenmacher?
Yeah, Schoenmacher. He's following up with a guy who had a crush on the son of the person who shows up in the notes of his father, which is, I mean, Stencil's on some thin ice out here. Like, we're giving him a hard time because some of these stories don't feel like they're probably that accurate to what his father was actually doing, but he's doing his best.
Yeah, I mean, he may or may not have gone undercover as an alligator in the sewers, so he's pushing the limits a little bit.
Yeah, so the implication that we get through pushing these limits is that here is one of the kinds of stories that Stencil has pulled together, presumably related in a rambling sort of impressionistic way to Eigenvalue, either as a justification for Stencil's interest in Eigenvalue or as part of this psychodental procedure. It seems to be kind of Stencil does not necessarily seem to be a patient of Eigenvalue so much as Eigenvalue, in as much as he is interested in psychology and history, has taken an interest in this weird guy who's asking him a bunch of questions about various people he has tangential connections to.
Well, Eigenvalue really rags on Stencil when he comes in. You know, like, Stencil makes an appointment and Eigenvalue's sort of assistant at the front desk calls that it's time for the Stencil appointment. And when Stencil comes in, he's just immediately making fun of him. And we sort of get this paragraph that sort of indicates that while, you know, Stencil starts to tell his story, which is what the majority of this chapter is. And then at the same time, Eigenvalue is just sitting there thinking about how much he sucks.
Yeah, from behind his desk in the office, Eigenvalue said, "You're a bad detective and a worse spy," which kind of sums up his whole conception of Stencil.
Yeah, and he makes this like tooth analogy where he says cavities in the teeth occur for good reason, yet we have men like Stencil who must go about grouping the world's random caries, which means cavities, into cabals. So he kind of describes Stencil as someone who's like trying to connect all these random cavities into some sort of organized conspiracy.
The last sort of 2 chapters of this section, he talks about effectively just how Stencil's in this rut and sort of unable to grasp the the sort of major meaning of things for being stuck in sort of the specific details of the past.
Yeah, in a world such as you inhabit, Mr. Stencil, any cluster of phenomena can be a conspiracy. And then Eigenvalue basically asks him, like, why even bother talking to me or anyone? You could just go to an encyclopedia, circle a bunch of random entries, and be like, this explains everything. Which is basically, Thomas Pynchon invents the conspiracy corners of the internet in a big way here, of just relating a massive amount of information to itself and tying yourself up into knots on its account.
Yeah, and to be fair to Eigenvalue, like, Stencil comes into his office and is like, they've dismantled the alligator patrol. And is like stricken that they have shut down the alligator patrol. So I can see why Eigenvalue thinks this guy is a little crazy, that he thinks that this sort of like alligator hunting group is clearly like up to something, and that maybe they're trying to, like, he says slowly, as to not attract attention, as though they've like purposefully dismantled this group for some espionage related reason.
I don't know. In what political context are we reading this, if not a context in which groups and organizations at a governmental level are slowly dismantled for the sake of an ideological apparatus that is not entirely taken at face value by many people?
We'll get to that further when we get to one battle after another.
Yeah, there you go. Shall we jump into, I guess, the meat of the narrative here in 1899? 1899, where it's 1 year after 1898 with our adventures in Cairo, although we don't have a direct connection to them yet, because we are introduced first and foremost to Evan Godolphin, who strikes a bit of a different figure, I think, in this chapter than he did in the last chapter wherein we saw him. A little bit more bumbling. He is physically described as more rotund and fatter than I think the description from Schoenmaker's perspective kind of painted him, as this striking, almost Grecian figure.
It was before he leaned out, being on the run with his father for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, here we get him. He's sort of a ne'er-do-well. He's living in France because his family as a whole are sort of too by the book, too much of sticks in the mud, and so he has exiled himself to the continent so that he can party.
Yeah, he was expelled from Dartmouth for leading a nihilist group called the League of the Red Sunrise, whose method of hastening the revolution was to hold mad and drunken parties beneath the Commodore's window.
I thought it was really funny that he calls his family the establishment with a capital E.
Yeah, it really paints a picture of the kind of guy Evan must be to be kicked out of a group that is accelerationist, but through throwing house parties. Like, you're too bad to throw house parties effectively.
I feel like we just keep encountering temporally displaced members of the whole sick crew. That, like, this is actually the thing that Stencil seems to be uncovering, is that this particular type of asshole has been alive and well throughout history.
It's a real the friends you made along the way situation. That is who V is.
So Evan gets this telegram from his father, a member of the establishment, that says, "Here you were sacked. If you need someone to talk to, I am at Piazza della Signoria." Patrick will be relying on you for Italian pronunciation
Signoria
throughout this chapter. 5, 8th floor. I should very much like to see you, son. Unwise to say too much in telegram. Visu. You understand, father. So that's our first introduction to Visu, which I don't know if anybody else thought it sounded like a sneeze.
That's an interesting one. Yeah.
Visu.
We should say, for folks who, I don't know, maybe you're listening to this on audiobook, maybe you're not reading along, but this is spelled Vissu. Visu. And it comes up a lot. And is not a real word.
Increment the V counter as a proper noun with a V. I was pronouncing it Visu in my head because I had to Google it, or I Googled it immediately because I wasn't sure if it was a real thing or not. And There was a theory that the name comes from Wie heißt du? What is your name in German? So,
oh yeah, J. Cary Grant of the companion to V fame has a lengthy explanation of the scholarly debates that have gone on about the origins and implications and etymological relations of Visu, one of which indeed is this what is your name connection. Another one is that you can decode it as resembling V he is us or V she is you. If you want to unscramble some letters, there is another implication of if you take the German more literally and frame it as how are you called, you could then reinterpret that remark as how can I get in touch with you. There's another reading. Where is it? There's a cognate in the Sami word Vaisu, Viessu, which means a mountain hospice. So many people have tried to figure out what was Pynchon drawing on when he came up with this particular appellation for what we will soon come to understand is like a mystical
Shangri-La
lost city. Yeah.
So we didn't resolve how to pronounce porpentine versus porpentine, and we similarly may not resolve whether it's Visu or Vaisu.
It has to be Visu because it has the V sound in it.
But the Vaisu does sound more like German. I don't know, based on my very limited knowledge of German. If it's supposed to be
German. We also later relate it to Vesuvius.
Mm-hmm.
Vesuvius.
Or Vesuvius.
Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Venus
comes up. We'll get there when we get there.
V is there are so many V's.
I mean,
a
Victoria's
multiplicity
back
of
too.
V's.
Yeah, Victoria's back. Well, we gotta get
Victoria's
to Victoria.
back.
First, we should stick with Evan, though.
Yes, Evan Godolphin.
So Evan gets this telegram from his father, and specifically, he is caught up on this part of the telegram that says Visu. And he says, like, oh, this is a Visu situation.
Oh, is this the same Evan Godolphin that was the pilot that then had his face reconstructed?
I mean, presumably they do share
that
the exact name.
I things are coming together.
That's what I was saying, that I feel like in the first place, when we were introduced to Evan Godolphin, he's this kind of suave, debonair, has it all together. I mean, he presents as he's like an ace pilot, but as we talked about, he mostly flies reconnaissance missions. But here he is
he's just been like a party boy.
Yeah, he's like a ex-frat boy.
From aristocratic family.
Yeah, who's kind of, he's described as, I mean, Pynchon has a lot of like, I guess, anti-fatness in this book, we should say, that like, oftentimes characters are described not necessarily neutrally by the narrator, but like self-deprecating about their weight and their physique across this book, especially in the case of Benny Profane, who meditates on this theme a lot. But here, Evan Godolphin is also explicitly said to be like a large, chubby boy, not yet even a man across most of the text here, but
which is very different from how Schoenmaker describes him.
Yes.
Okay, that really ties some things together for me. I did not make that connection until this exact moment. So, Evan Godolphin, yeah, the characters, okay, our connections are knitting together even more cleanly than I had previously thought.
Yeah, and surely they will all resolve into a single, cohesive,
a very neat
clear,
story.
orderly,
it'll be super clear at the end of this book who V is.
When we get very nice point at the bottom of the V.
One very nice point, exactly. Let's see what else do we need to say here.
He gets to. I mean, he sort of skips over the travel, but he gets to Florence. Yeah. And when he's in Florence, he's sort of in a nice little cab. He's going to the address his father gave him. And he sees a beautiful signorina out the window, and he sings to her, and she kind of cringes and looks away.
Everybody's singing, and that's the thing. Pynchon wants to ensure that you know this about Italians. they're always singing some thematically resonant opera somewhere across the way out of some window far in the distance.
And that just extends to people who are in Italy
and
also.
It just extends to people who are in Italy. This is the style of the place.
Or in the sailor's grave.
Yeah, I mean, Pynchon just likes songs generally, but the last place we got this many songs was at the Saints' Feast in Little Italy, which I feel the scenes that we get in Florence seem to really carry on from that imagery in a big way. This sort of never-ending, somewhat threatening or violent carnival that is processing across the streets constantly.
Patrick, I have a question for you, which is that a lot of this chapter takes place in Florence.
Correct.
And there's a lot of reference to different landmarks in Florence. And as someone who has been to Florence when I was 3, I do not remember any of these landmarks. And I was wondering if, as someone who's been to Florence as an adult, you could maybe situate us a little bit in the space.
Yeah, I would say that in my 72 hours of being in Florence...
so long Evan's there.
Here's what I want to say here. I think the landscape seems to align pretty much 1-to-1 of what you would write about if you were drawing on your experience of being in Florence for about 72 hours.
Does it align with like our travel guide vibes? I know they reference Cook again in this chapter.
I mean, this one definitely feels a little bit less directly cribbed from a particular travel guide and a little bit more maybe cribbed from, I don't want to speculate too much biographically here, but perhaps Pynchon's own experience. I know that when he was in the Navy, he was stationed in the Mediterranean, so I think it's fairly likely that, you know, his boat gave him some shore leave, at which time he may have taken a couple of days in Florence or something. We know that he would go see sort of like museums and churches and cultural artifacts and whatnot when he was able to do so while he was in the Navy. That's one of the few things that his shipmates recall about him. And so, you know, I looked up some of the street names in here, and by and large, they are real streets, and they are definitely a lot of the action is centered around, you know, like the Uffizi Gallery, which nowadays is, of course, just like a museum that I believe is owned by the state or the city. I'm not sure exactly what the ownership situation was. I assume it was private back in 1899. But like, it's a real place that if you were in Florence, you would probably go to and see the things that were there. Of course, Pynchon would have also been there while he was in the Navy. You know, there might have still been some rebuilding going on following the war, because I believe he was in the Navy sometime in the 50s. I'm losing track exactly of the timeline there, but yeah, I think broadly this seems to line up. There are, in fact, real streets in Florence called the Via del Paradiso, and or no, there is no Via del Paradiso. There's Via Inferno and Via Purgatorio, and one of Pynchon's narrators remarks that like there's no street called Paradise, but there is the Purgatory and the Hell Street, and those are real.
And have you seen the Campanile?
Yeah. These are. I mean, the thing about Florence is that it's fairly small. The like historical touristy part of Florence, again, where a lot of this action seems to be taking place, is not like an enormous area. It is not exactly a metropolis.
I guess it's probably also important on top of the sort of geographical stuff that Dante, Machiavelli, and the Medici family are all Florentine, and they come up absolutely nonstop over the next 60 pages.
Yeah, everyone seems to have read Machiavelli's The Prince and has, as Pynchon points out, like a different, totally unique and effectively ungrounded interpretation of what Machiavelli meant in writing The Prince.
I've not read The Prince. Is it exclusively about this one metaphor? Because it's the only metaphor that anyone is interested in, is this lion versus fox dichotomy. but surely there's other stuff in that book.
Yeah, it is not exclusively about the metaphor of lions and foxes. I mean, maybe this is a fine enough place to talk about it, but like it is written as a how-to guide, basically, and was part of Machiavelli's attempt to ingratiate himself into the auspices of the powerful Medici family, who had an inimical relationship with him at various points in time over the course of his political career. But the popular connotation of this work is that it is like politics is like a zero-sum game. When we call something Machiavellian, we mean kind of like evil or bad or self-serving, that to do something in a Machiavellian way is to sort of do it with no regard for the outcome for anyone else other than yourself, and to sort of put yourself in the best possible position, which is sort of kind of true, but it does represent a break from a more classically virtuous understanding of ethics that would say, like, yes, you need courage, but not too much courage. And yes, you need honor, but honor shouldn't be your only guiding principle. And yes, you need honesty, but sometimes it might be okay to lie. And Machiavelli's perspective on a lot of this stuff is, the fox and the lion stuff, which is to say being forceful in what you want, but also knowing when to be deceptive and not to reveal all of your hand, comes up several times, but there is a lot more to it than that one section that people keep referencing in this chapter. There's also a lot of stuff that is just sort of like brass tacks, much like the way that people say, every leader in business and industry should read like Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And like a lot of that book it is important to think about how you need to feed your army when you are marching across enemy territory. A lot of the Prince is also sort of brass tacks about like, here's how you might want to think about, popular revolts within your kingdom. And here's how you might want to think about being truthful to your subjects, and et cetera, or how to organize like a military fortress, that sort of thing.
Section 2.
Section 2.
We are introduced to another sort of little group of weird guys with a strange objective in the way that Pynchon keeps putting in front
sort
of
of
us.
Ocean's 11 crew.
Yeah. So what they want to do a heist. What is the heist they want to do?
They want to steal the Birth of Venus from the gallery.
Botticelli's Birth of Venus. So this is, of course, the painting that, you may have seen any number of places on like a wallpaper at a fancy beauty salon or wherever.
I don't know what type of beauty salons you're going to, Patrick, but none of them that I have been to have the Birth of Venus on the wall.
So yeah, this is, what are their names here? We've got Signor Mantissa, and we have a fellow who is only known as Cesare, sharing a name with Cesare Borgia. Speaking of influential figures in Florentine history, here's another one. One of the patriarchs of the like Borgia clan and family, who
sounds really
You're giving me nothing here, Patrick.
I'm not totally sure exactly like everything he got up to. He was a character in Assassin's Creed 2. I know that. Oh yeah, right here, Wikipedia says he was the major inspiration for The Prince by Machiavelli.
Okay, so like an Italian historical
figure. Florence for a long time was ruled by the competing and extremely wealthy interests of like the Medici family and the Borgia family and a couple of other like Renaissance era families, all of whom had extremely weird, oftentimes violent relationships against each other and feuds and reconciliations, and some of them became, cardinals or popes or imagine like the most corruption you could think of in like a small part of a modernizing country.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
I spent a lot of time while reading this chapter writing in the margins. What was going on in Italy in 1899? What was going on in Venezuela in 1899?
I also spent a lot of time Googling this, and I really went deep on the situation with Venezuelans in Florence. I think that's all made up. There was a Venezuelan British American incident, which we get to. I can
I saw
explain,
that.
but yeah, I think the Venezuelans in Italy. I just kept Googling Venezuelans in Italy ? And not finding anything about it.
I also came up empty there, so I think you're probably right on that.
Yeah, in the Italian context, the single most important thing to keep in mind here is that by 1899, we are within 3 decades of Italy becoming like a unified nation. Like there were a bunch of civil wars fought across what we now recognize as the nation of Italy in order to unify it under a single sort of national identity and national interest, which happened across Europe and at various times, but sort of quite lately in the European context as far as Italy is concerned. And this is what is referred to generally, but also several times in the text as the Risorgimento.
We get a lot of Garibaldi references in this chapter, especially with the Gaucho.
Yeah, and Garibaldi was one of the preeminent generals and figures in this Italian unification campaign.
So if we return to our friends Mantissa and Cesare, they are kind of getting drunk on wine while, I guess, sort of thinking about this heist that they want to pull off. And I just wanted to highlight, there were a lot of funny moments in this chapter. That was something I very much enjoyed about it. I liked in this scene that Cesare, I'll quote here, "It had occurred to Cesare sometime during the reign that he was a steamboat." So this guy's just like sitting at this wine bar, drunk on wine, has convinced himself that he's a steamboat, maybe another connection to our inanimacy, and just starts like sort of going like toot toot as though he were a steamboat while he's sitting in this wine bar.
Yeah, he's blowing into the bottle to make it go like a hoo.
Oh yeah, hoo hoo, yeah.
There's a line in the recently released album by Geese. One of the lyrics is, "I was a sailor and now I'm a boat." And I keep hearing that line as I'm listening to the record, and I'm like, is Cameron Winter talking about Thomas Pynchon's V? Thinking about the relationship of animacy and inanimacy and sailors becoming identified with the boats that they sailed, which we see here.
I've also had a lyric stuck in my head, but it's from Taylor Swift. I've been thinking of the lyric from Mastermind, "I'm only cryptic and Machiavellian because I care."
Which could describe about half the characters in this chapter.
Truly.
Cryptic and Machiavellian. So yes, these two, Mantissa and Cesare. Mantissa, this is another one of these either deliberately unclear or multi-layered kind of speaking names. There's a mathematical concept of the Mantissa, and then it broadly refers to the significant digits of a decimal, or like the significand in a mathematical context. But there are also some other interpretations that this might be a historical allusion. But I do feel like in that we have gotten a character named Eigenvalue and another character who comes up later named Demivolt. I feel like the naming characters for concepts, like nominal concepts within specific disciplines, Demivolt is like a horse jumping term, seems to be a thing that Pynchon is interested in. And then they encounter the Gaucho. The Gaucho shows up.
Yeah, so it seems they brought on the Gaucho for help with their heist. They determined that they couldn't execute the heist by themselves, and so they have enlisted the Gaucho to assist them in their mission. Andrew,
who is that Gaucho amigo?
Well, in this case, he's not in his yellow poncho, but he is in his wide awake hat. This reminded me a lot of Benny Profane, because there's several times in the first 3 or 4 times you meet the Gaucho where it reminds you that he is still wearing his big hat. I guess, as you would not necessarily expect based on the name, he's not Argentinian. He's from Venezuela, and he has been brought in to help them with this heist. He is absolutely against everything they have planned. He thinks they're absolute idiots and that they're going to blow this wide open. on accident.
Yeah, they have an elaborate, they like bring out schematics and they have an elaborate plan where they're going to go in at precisely this time and they're going to cut open they're going to cut the canvas from the frame that is holding the painting, and then they are going to roll it up and stuff it inside the hollowed out trunk of a Judas tree that they plan to bring along with them so that they can just like walk out with the tree inconspicuously, because as the Gaucho points out, they plan to walk down a hallway with no other exits to the end of one of these rooms, these chambers, in which the Birth of Venus, and here we go, hangs on the western wall.
Hey.
There's I guess it's important to note that the schematics Patrick mentioned are a hand-drawn map by Mantissa, and so the plan relies on them to walk several hundred meters down this hallway and then several hundred meters back carrying a small tree, which they will switch with another decoy tree that does not have a copy of the Birth of Venus inside of it. Skipping ahead slightly, there's a really good scene in a section coming up where the Gaucho actually does his own reconnaissance at the gallery to find that there is a side door right by the painting, and he is furious again with Mantissa that is not on the map.
And why they think carrying a tree out of the building is going to be less conspicuous than carrying the painting out of the building?
They say there's construction happening.
Yeah, it is less conspicuous to walk out carrying a tree than, one of the most famous paintings of all time.
Yeah, but like a tree is so big. Like,
yeah, it's important.
But this is the thing. The painting is also really big. And the Gaucho does not exactly realize this at the time, but they explain to him how big the painting is. It's like 5 feet by 9 feet or something.
Patrick, how do they describe how large it is?
In centimeters?
The Gaucho makes the comment that it is big enough for him to find, again, back to your sort of fatphobic comment, that the fattest prostitute in Florence, and the Gaucho and the prostitute can hang out under the painting and have space enough for the mother of the prostitute as well.
Yeah.
It's a big painting.
It's a big painting, but they want to put it in this tree. So it's a sizable tree as well.
But the Gaucho, it's safe to say, thinks this plan is ridiculous.
He wants to just like throw some grenades and like punch out anybody who asks any questions or kill them in order to get this painting off the wall.
But Mantissa seems to sort of delight in his sort of fox-like approach. He likes the intrigue. He likes the mystery. He's very attached to this idea of hiding the painting in the tree. That is not something he wishes to compromise or give up. He likes the art of the deception, it seems.
They agree to disagree, but the Gaucho says, fine, I'll go scope out the location, and, we'll reconvene with this plan about the tree and the barge that'll be waiting for us at midnight on the river that we have to make our way to after we secure the painting, etc., etc.
We want to talk about, this is where the Venezuelan conflict gets mentioned. Do we want to go ahead and explain what that is? Because it's going to keep coming up.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the Gaucho mentions a conflict between Great Britain and Venezuela. This was a territory dispute with British Guiana in the mid-1890s. It's eventually sort of forcefully settled by the United States, who invokes the Monroe Doctrine and forces France to mediate the dispute. And I think the land is eventually given to what at the time is British Guiana. So this sort of international, like that is sort of our Fashoda incident of this chapter, is the tensions between the United States, Britain, and Venezuela, but also the drybund countries of Germany, Austro-Hungary, and Italy all coming together.
Thank you for the summary, Andrew. We're just going to keep you on the obscure international incidents of imperial expansion for the remainder of this book.
To it. I love anytime the United States busts out the Monroe Doctrine out of nowhere to get in the way of someone in Europe's plans.
Oh, look who's back. Knock, knock. It's Victoria Wren. She's here. What's she
Victoria
been up
Wren.
to?
I wrote from Egypt in the margin here in case we had forgotten where we last encountered Victoria Wren.
Yeah, now, Duri, this is the same Victoria Wren who we last...
We the connections are connecting. To be fair, Evan Godolphin was described very differently in this chapter than he was when he was previously introduced. I was picturing this like suave captain, and he was not presented that way in this chapter.
Yeah, no, he is, he's not indeed. The least suave. Instead, he is sort of like frat boy yelling at women from a passing carriage.
Serenading Patrick.
Yeah. He's got bum
Serenading.
riz, and it works out for him.
It really does. Anyways, Victoria Wren, she turns out she was the one who was being serenaded when she was on the cable car.
Yeah, she was in a cable car and Evan was passing in a cab.
Yeah. Sorry if I'm asking a lot of questions during this episode. I read this like a week and a half ago and some of the details escape me.
We get it. You read ahead.
I read ahead. I will not be reading ahead again.
It caused some problems.
It caused some problems.
Yeah, so in the meantime, since we last saw Victoria, she is sort of alienated herself from sweet little Mildred and her father, Alistair. We finally get direct textual confirmation. Alistair, at least as far as Stencil can recollect, given that he is accounting for this entire narrative, Alistair, indeed, Victoria's father. This is a lot of the implied relationships in our reintroduction to Victoria here are sort of codified into a single paragraph. She had this like affair with Goodfellow that led to, let's see, as Pynchon writes, afterward, they've both been quick to blame the violent emotions which arise during any tense international situation. This was at the time of the Fashoda crisis for her deflowering. Now, 6 or 7 months later, she found it difficult to determine how much she had in fact planned, how much had been out of her control. And their relationship had caused the rift between Victoria and her father. So Victoria has kind of been moving around in the meantime, kind of staying on the move.
She has also reconciled this extramarital affair with her Roman Catholicism. It says that her private brand of Roman Catholicism merely condoned what the church as a whole regarded as a sin. This was more than a simple sanction. It was implicit acceptance of the 4 episodes as outward and visible signs of an inward and spiritual grace belonging to Victoria alone. And kind of goes on to talk a little bit about kind of how she's justified her actions in relation to her religious devotion.
Yeah, and she has begun to imagine that all of this extramarital sex she's been having is above board as far as her relationship with Christ is concerned, because effectively all of the men she has been sleeping with are kind of imperfect embodiments of this true profound love that she feels for Christ and God. And so in her mind, she is respectfully carrying out her love for God through this physical metaphor of sleeping with a bunch of people.
Yeah, I think Pynchon seems to be returning to this theme of sort of religious hypocrisy, which he's approached from a number of different angles and a variety of different religions so far in the book. But I think maybe Victoria is the clearest kind of embodiment of this, of kind of how people justify their actions in accordance with their faith. Maybe that also relates to our ego and super ego. You know, she's kind of reconciling what her faith and morality expect of her with her sort of individual drive for pleasure.
Yeah, I think that's a good read. I will say, Pynchon says that the enamel is sort of like a super ego, but by and large, he seems to mean just the regular kind of ego. In that eigenvalues explanation of psychodontia early on, he says that he uses the word the I and the it, which are just the translations of ego meaning I and id meaning it. The superego, as far as like the pulp and the enamel are concerned, like there seems to be a slippery, maybe even non-existent distinction between ego and superego here. So I think it's safe to say that Pynchon is thinking about this as kind of a dualistic split, or Pynchon through eigenvalue is thinking of this as kind of dualistic split, not the full tripartite explanation that Freud eventually gets to. Victoria also has, throughout this chapter, a weird comb in her hair. Several characters remark on this, that there is this ivory comb that she has in her hair constantly that is carved into the shape of 5 crucified soldiers of the British Army, that it says that she found in a bazaar in Cairo. It was carved by an artisan among the Mahdist faction in what Pynchon writes as the commemoration of the crucifixions of 83 in the country east of invested Khartoum. It seems that like this reference to the crucifixions of 83 is a total invention. There's not really a historical record of anyone actually crucifying British soldiers back during the wars in Khartoum, but it is I guess, an effective visual icon for the fact that across this entire chapter, what we are dealing with is the manifestations and consequences of empire and reactions to that expansion of empire, which may involve crucifixion or the commemoration of crucifixion.
So Victoria has a run-in with the older Godolphin.
Yes.
Hugh.
Another Hugh. Not to be confused with Hugh Bongo Shaftesbury.
Who may have been Eric Bongo Shaftesbury. This is why some people think that may have just been like an error in the text at one point, that like there's another character in the book named Hugh, or maybe this is, again, linked in some way to the previous Bongo Shaftesbury. But yeah, Hugh Godolphin, definitely for sure named Hugh.
And Hugh Godolphin seems a little bit of a kind with Stencil. He has sort of this whole conspiracy in his head, which turns out to be maybe somewhat true. He thinks people are out to get him related to this whole Visu situation. And he approaches Victoria for help. They're
in a church, we should say. She encounters him in a church.
So yeah, Victoria knows who he is because he's a well-renowned explorer. He was a member of the British Navy who more recently had attempted to reach the South Pole on behalf of Britain. That's where in the previous section, two sections ago, the younger Godolphin thinks that he had a sort of mental break, and that's why he's writing him about Visu again. But he's an Antarctic explorer who attempted to reach the South Pole during Antarctic winter.
And in a way that is distinct from, I think, Duri, you're right, that there are some comparisons to make. Like, Stencil is cut from this same kind of world explorer, global adventurer cloth. But Hugh Godolphin sort of seems like, I don't want to say the real deal, but a little bit like the genuine article. Like, this is a truly world famous, you would recognize him on sight if you were plugged into the goings on of the English Empire, as someone who goes places and plants flags, much more so than the global adventure by way of espionage and spycraft style of Herbert Stencil.
And so he begins to tell Victoria about Visu, which is this sort of mystical, seemingly kind of imaginary place, but he claims to have been to Visu.
He describes, and this is a quote, how it was reached on camelback over a vast tundra, past the dolmens and the temples of dead cities, finally to the banks of a broad river which never sees the sun, so thickly roofed is it with foliage. The river is traveled in long teak boats, which are carved like dragons and paddled by brown men, whose language is unknown to all but themselves. In 8 days' time there is a portage over a neck of treacherous swampland to a green lake, and across the lake rise the first foothills of the mountains which ring Visu. Native guides will only go a short distance into these mountains. Soon they will turn back, pointing out the way. And so, like, he describes this effectively impossible to reach locale that he has been to, and which has kind of driven him to obsession ever since he first went there, as he says, 15 years ago.
He also sort of goes on to describe what this place looks like, saying the colors, so many colors. The trees outside the head shaman's house have spider monkeys which are iridescent. They change color in the sunlight. Everything changes. The mountains, the lowlands are never the same color from 1 hour to the next. No sequence of colors in the same from day to day, as if you lived inside a madman's kaleidoscope. Even your dreams are flooded with colors, with no shapes Occidental ever saw. We get this, I mean, that passage about color sort of shows up again and again and again throughout, and it's sort of juxtaposed next to Mantissa. In the previous section, we got a description of him being sort of living very gray life, his sort of eyes being gray, having no love in his life. And I think that sort of continues through the rest of that chapter, sort of the Mantissa in monotone and the older Godolphin sort of driven mad by the rainbow. He tasted the rainbow.
He does indeed. Yeah, the sort of like grayness and like fading color quality of Mantissa's vision is referenced in A Companion to V as perhaps being a reference to, I did not actually know this, but the word mantis, like a praying mantis, comes from a Greek word, mantis, which means prophet or seer. And so potentially this name and the lack of color that exists in his world is a reference to the sort of like blind prophet archetype of, classical Greek tragedy and myth. But for Hugh here, a large part of his conception of Visu is driven by this image, as he describes, but as if the place were a woman you had found somewhere out there, a dark woman tattooed from head to toes, and somehow you had got separated from the garrison and you found yourself unable to get back, so that you had to be with her, close to her, day in, day out. And Victoria replies, and you would be in love with her. And then Hugh continues, at first, but soon that skin, the gaudy, god-awful riot of pattern and color, begin to get between you and whatever it was in her you thought you loved. And he imagines, like, flaying the skin and, like, the colorful tattoos from this woman to, like, reveal the flesh underneath. And the relationship between exploration and skin and the surface effects of history versus what Godolphin imagines is the explorer's desire to kind of penetrate to the heart of something, as opposed to being a tourist who appreciates the surface and the skin of things. And he imagines, like, flaying the inhabitants of this place in order to reveal what is beneath the skin. Feels perhaps like some of Pynchon's most vividly and violently rendered critiques of kind of the colonialist impulse here, like predicated on difference in skin and, the violence that the British Empire would do to it.
Yeah, he also talks about sort of the civilian idea of the military, that people in the military like to go out and sort of collect what Pynchon, or what Hugh describes as a harem of dusky native women, sort of as they're pillaging the world. In an upcoming Hugh section, he also describes tourism kind of like that. Like, he describes coming to Florence, coming to other cities as sort of the civilian version of looking for skin and just sort of staying on the surface all the time.
Yeah, but this vision of the tattooed woman recurs to him over and over as an icon for Visu more broadly. This is the territory that he could not penetrate in some way. This is the territory that remained for him, like, unknown and secret. And there is, of course, a lot of there's a lot of analogs you could draw between this chapter and specifically Hugh Godolphin's exploratory impulse and like Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness that commentators have written about. So you could certainly seek that out if that is a comparison you're interested in. Victoria, meanwhile, is pretty into this. She's like, do go on. Secret sort of hidden conspiracies about places that like they don't want us to know about. And you say you're being pursued by people on account of your knowledge of this information. Like, keep talking.
Yeah,
you're speaking my language.
This kind of reminds me of her relationship described earlier with her uncle, who was a quote-unquote explorer in Australia, and how she really enjoyed listening to his tales and then reimagined those when she was sitting in mass. And this kind of reminded me of that like it's almost like she's sitting and listening to one of the tales that her uncle spins and sort of picturing herself in the tale, living vicariously through this explorer.
Yeah, and I mean, in that Victoria is oftentimes directly textually compared as like a figuration of England and the British Empire more broadly. It is funny, I guess, that she's like consistently astounded by and regaled by the tales that these men tell her of their conquests across the world.
So Godolphin thinks that people are after him on account of this information that he has about Visu.
Which is why he has reached out to Evan.
Yes, and then he's confessing all of this to Victoria because he's really stressed out, and
once again Victoria appears like this really magnetic figure. Like people, she could be passing by in a cable car and people will sing to her, or she could be another lonely soul at this in this church, and someone will just start telling her about their deepest, most secret angst.
Yeah, that he hasn't even told his son about in full. And she keeps asking him, more questions, trying to dig deeper, probe deeper into this situation.
Yeah, it's worth noting that when they went to Visu the first time, he describes only himself, that is Godolphin, his second in command, and then a third individual making it out alive, and that the rest of the party is killed. But that was 15 years before 1899, so the events that we're currently reading about, and that it wasn't, I guess it was sort of a thing that has happened more recently that we're not yet aware of, that is the impetus for this sort of more recent concern about agents of Visu coming after him.
And the 15 years sort of broadly lines up because, as we soon learn, Evan Godolphin was kind of regaled with tales of Visu as a child. So if he is sort of recently kicked out of college, this broadly lines up that 15 years ago his father would have emerged from this sojourn to Visu and started talking to him about what goes on there as Evan was a small child.
And so with that, in section 4, we cut back to Evan,
who is in his father's apartment, and some more extremely silly spy stuff occurs.
Yeah, he knows that there's like a message for him here, most likely, and sort of has to put on his spy hat to figure out where his father has left a message for him.
Yeah, this is like a puzzle from an adventure video game where it's like you're just clicking everywhere on the screen until it lets you click on the pants, and then the protagonist is like, maybe there's something inside this discarded pair of trousers. I better search the pockets.
Yeah, and he finds a cigarette case with 4 cigarettes, and then they're all hand-rolled cigarettes, and originally he doesn't really think much of it, and then he kind of thinks like his dad and unrolls each of the cigarettes, and on the inside of one of them finds a message.
This is a good trick.
Genius.
I don't smoke cigarettes. Certainly not hand-rolled ones, but maybe I should have some secret messages written inside some just for folks to find.
It might be more conspicuous if you don't smoke.
That's fair. But someone searching the room would be like, Look at this pretentious asshole. There's no way there's messages inscribed in here.
So in the third cigarette, he finds a note written in pencil on the inside of the cigarette paper that says, "Discovered here. Scheissvogels, 10 p.m. Be careful. Father." Which is, I will point out, yet another German beer garden.
They're all over the place. It mentions it, I guess once we actually get to Scheissvogels, that it's just a great spot for Europeans of all makes and models to hang out and feel at home. Just find a local German beer garden.
They talk about how like everyone's down with the quaint Italian cafe in the daytime, and they like spending their mornings and afternoons there. But like at a certain point, you need a big stein of lager, and a beer garden is going to be the place to go.
The beer gardens seem to be the place where things go down. Everyone is always rendezvousing at the beer garden, whether it's in Cairo or Florence.
And this one, we should point out, in German means something like bird shit. Scheiss,
I
shit,
did not know that.
Vogel, bird. So this is the bird shit bar.
Victoria Wren,
a bird. Are there any other birds thus far in this?
Mildred Wren.
Yeah,
same Wren. I miss Mildred.
I hope she's
I want
all right.
her to come back. I liked her and her rock.
Yeah, shout out. I hope Mildred's all right.
So he leaves the apartment because he does not know where this beer garden is, and he kind of just needs to kill some time. And the stairs completely collapse underneath of him, and he ends up hanging from the banister.
Yeah, speaking of kind of Looney Tunes moments, this feels like another one of these, like he steps through the stair and then stumbles, and then the sort of railing of the stair swings out into the empty space of the stairwell, if I'm imagining this right.
Yeah, it's very spy comedy to be sort of, you're kind of hanging out on the, I don't know, I was thinking sort of your like gutters, kind of hanging out there when you've separated from the wall.
And he originally thinks that this was an accident, but then he thinks to himself, how accidental was it, really? Those stairs were all right when I came up. He smiled nervously. He was getting almost as loony as his father. So he is also beginning to enter into this conspiratorial mindset that maybe, something to do with what his father is being pursued for caused them to, them to tamper with these steps.
And it turns into something that's like a little bit, what is that scene in The Bourne Identity? There's like a staircase fight where Jason Bourne like knocks a guy over the railing and then shoots several people as he's falling down to the floor. Like lands on a guy. It's kind of like that by way of a Pink Panther movie where he sort of like swings himself over to the other side after comically dangling there for a little while.
Was it Attack of the Clones when C-3PO kind of gets swung through the air in the droid factory?
Yeah, this is clearly what George Lucas was referencing. Yeah, which is all to say that it, once again, I think Pynchon's slapstick impulse begins to show up here.
And he's totally fine. He just
fine.
He just
Walks
sort of
off.
swings a little bit, jumps down to the railing below the chunk of the staircase that he was on that collapsed, walks outside as if nothing had happened. But then...
And then is apprehended by 2 policemen.
Instantly arrested on suspicion of having bad papers.
Yes.
Although he suspects... They say you may be from any country in the world, even one we have never heard of. And then Evan thinks to himself, flesh began to crawl on the back of his neck. He had suddenly got the insane notion that they were talking about Visu. And so he's sort of arrested by these police. And then we cut back to the Venezuelans.
Well, we're introduced to new Venezuelans here. The members of the Venezuelan consulate, Salazar, the vice consul, and Raton, his chief. And they are fretting.
There's been, they've gotten a cable from Rome that they are expecting increased sort of political agitation activity. And they've also, there's been a sighting of the Gaucho in Florence, to which Salazar responds, Gauchos are Argentinian. They're not our problem.
But this Gaucho, they presume, still might pose a problem for them.
This is really where I was doing most of my Venezuelans in Florence Googling, because
You're like, surely there has to be
you
some
sort of find out
historical
about
precedent
a
here.
very large population of Venezuelans living in Florence, and there being a Venezuelan consulate in Florence, even though this isn't Rome, which I think, major cities have consulates, or countries have consulates in major cities that are not the capital necessarily, but it just seemed like there was a lot of Venezuelan infrastructure in a seemingly random Italian town.
Yeah, which turns out not to have been the case, perhaps historically.
Yeah, but not entirely off base in the context of the story. So they try to shake down the Gaucho, who is, as you said, Andrew, sort of sizing up. He's casing the Uffizi to figure out if there has to be a better way of going about this than the stupid plan where we walk down the hallway with the tree. And in fact, he thinks of, there is, in fact, some better ways of doing this than walking down the hallway with the tree.
Yeah, and he's not even really sure. He's like contemplating the painting and is not even really sure why Mentisa would want this painting.
A confusing picture, he calls it. He's staring at it. I think it's always fun in novels or other prose fiction when like particular paintings are described. The like literary critical word for this is ekphrasis, when you describe a work of art in sort of another kind of artwork, like a poem or a prose piece.
That's fun. I learned a new word today.
Yeah, ekphrasis.
Ekphrasis?
Ekphrasis.
Huh, interesting.
You could have like an ekphrastic poem, like Keats's Ode to a Grecian Urn. This is what a degree in literature is good for. Precisely this thing. But he talks about like he doesn't really understand the picture. There's like this one guy, there's this one sort of cherubic figure who's trying to drape a cloth over Venus, and there's this other guy who's trying to seemingly blow it off with his breath so he can look at her naked. And he's like, and she just seems to be staring off into God knows where for whatever reason. And he just doesn't get the big deal about this particular painting.
Then he too gets arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And they are taken for interrogation.
Yeah, he gets sort of driven around for a little while. They put a silk handkerchief over his eyes, drive up and down the roads, back and forth, sort of purposefully confuse where he is. But he's eventually sort of released into an interrogation room where he asks to use the restroom. And upon getting to the restroom, he comments on how nice it is and decides this must certainly be either an American or English facility because the plumbing infrastructure is too good.
Yeah, and the Gaucho, for his part, is not entirely sure why he has been arrested. He thinks to himself that if it were because of the whole Venezuelan situation, quote, he was in trouble. He had come to Florence specifically to organize the Venezuelan colony, who were centered in the northeast part of the city near Via Cavour. There were only a few hundred of them. They kept to themselves and worked either in the tobacco factory or at the Mercato Centrale, or as sutlers to the 4th Army Corps, whose installations were nearby. In 2 months, the Gaucho had squared them away into ranks and uniforms under the collective title Figli di Machiavelli, or, Sons of Machiavelli, which does not have, like, a particular ideological position, per se, but they like getting into fights and rioting, and he has sort of organized them to this end.
Mentions at some point that he's promised them a riot will occur, but they've been waiting for news from Caracas to instigate the riot, so they're kind of in a holding pattern.
And what he wants to do is to get word to his lieutenant here, Cuerna Cabron, about his capture and that tonight might be go time, even if they have not heard the word go from Caracas. And is this where he breaks to go pee?
That's what Andrew was saying.
About the restroom being too nice to be Venezuelan or Italian?
Yes. Yeah. But he takes off his collar and like writes a little note on the inside and then decides he's going to figure out how to get that collar with his note on it to someone.
Yeah. And then eventually he's taken back to the interrogation room where a person speaking English comes in and begins to ask him questions about Vaisu.
And then he's like, Visu, do you mean Venezuela?
Yeah, like, please tell me, are we talking about the Venezuelan situation or no?
Or no, is it Visu? Is it Venezuela? And they're like, no, Visu. And he's like, I don't know anything about Visu. It's a little unclear. It does say all at once the Gaucho for the first time since the jungles felt afraid. So it seems like maybe he does know something about Visu.
Yeah, when he answered, it was with an insolence that rang hollow even to himself. So he says that he doesn't know anything about Visu, but he is lying a little bit.
And then we cut back to the elder Godolphin.
In Victoria's room.
Mm-hmm. Maybe another imperfect model of Christ.
Indeed. Yeah, so he wakes up in Victoria's room and decides that he really should probably get to the beer garden if he's supposed to make this appointment.
Yeah, and she's gone. She promised that she wouldn't tell anybody this lengthy story that he told her about Visu. And then she leaves him this note, which basically says, I thought it was best to tell the authorities about this situation.
And it says he's only been asleep for an hour, so she instantly decided she was going to go tell people.
Yeah, Victoria seems like the absolute worst. This man just trusted her with his deepest, darkest secret. His one instruction was to not tell the authorities, and she's immediately like, I really think we need the help of the authorities.
Yeah, to not tell the authorities, but especially don't tell the British authorities.
And then she's like, no. We gotta get them involved.
Surely the Foreign Office will be able to sort this out.
So he's not thrilled about that and is like, I need to get out of Dodge.
We get another just really quick snippet of the idea of inanimate objects starting to talk, where Hugh says, "It was not my fault," he protested aloud to the empty room, as if the mother of pearl brushes, the lace and dimity, the delicate vessels of scent would somehow find tongue and rally round him. So once again, this idea of Pentecostal idea of tongues whirling around the room and things starting to speak of their own accord shows up.
He finds a pair of scissors, and he looks at himself in the reflection with the scissors. He thinks about killing himself briefly, and then says out loud, "No, not yet," and instead uses them to jimmy the door open and escape. Because she's locked him in. Not sure how this lock works, but I guess it's you need the key.
It's one of those old kinds of locks that just has a key.
Just a key, yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like just as I don't know if this will come back up again later, but it seems like the scissors are being used by Victoria as part of a dressmaking. He calls it a dressmaking scheme.
Yeah, she's in Florence. When we first meet her, it talks about her sort of sleeping with several men in the interim between Egypt and now to make a little money. But now that she's saved up a couple £100, she's looking to buy a tailor's business.
Yeah, she's sort of like an enterprising young woman now and has even begun to develop some political convictions, I think it says at one point. Specifically that she doesn't like anarchists. That's her main political conviction.
That's quite the hot take for, I guess, an upper echelon British socialite to have.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and Godolphin, for his sake, seems to kind of clock Victoria's odd fascination with espionage. He says he hadn't been shocked by her disclosure of the affair with Goodfellow in Cairo. He thought it unfortunate. It seemed to have given her some quaint and romantic views about espionage. So I think he is now kind of realizing that Victoria is maybe sort of romanticizing the espionage and fascinated with his story because she has this sort of romantic interest in espionage more broadly. She's sort of thrilled by the adventure tales.
Oh, she's romanticizing espionage, that's for sure. Yeah, and this is where Hugh Godolphin starts to have these thoughts about tourism and its relationship to skin that we have already sort of talked about. And I also noted we pick back up on some of the kind of layering and enamel, like the hard outer casing imagery that we began the chapter with here, where he wonders, did he owe it to them, the lovers of skin, not to tell about Visu, not even let them suspect the suicidal fact that below the glittering integument of every foreign land there is a hard, dead point of truth, and that in all cases, even England's, it is the same kind of truth, can be phrased in identical words. In this glittering integument, an integument is a tough outer layer, one might say, kind of like an enamel that shields the roiling id of the pulp of the tooth. Which I thought was neat. So he gets out of the room, and then people are tailing him, I believe.
A little bit of a chase scene.
A little bit of a chase scene.
Where he hears the guards coming up behind him. They say, "You were wanted for questioning." And then he just absolutely takes off running. He goes down an alley. He climbs a sort of a lattice work situation up a wall that has roses growing out of it and the thorns get in his hands. And then he bursts through a window where he stumbles upon a couple having sex in bed.
Straight out of like a James Bond, Jason Bourne sequence.
Again, I also think the Pink Panther is in here. I know we're referencing movies that sort of like come out like after this book in the mid 60s, but I mean Jason Bourne for sure, but
there's got to be some stumbling, bumbling spy movies.
Yeah, for sure.
40s and 50s that we're just less well versed in.
Indeed. But yeah, it's this classic scene of like he stumbles through the window and he's like, and they're like, oh. And then the chase continues.
Yeah, while he's chasing them, he runs into his, wait for it, good friend, Mantissa.
What are the odds?
What are the odds?
What are the odds?
These guys, this actually I think is really funny.
This scene cracked me up.
That they're old friends from their own respective previous lives who don't always see each other, but when they do, they're just right back at it.
And he encounters them. It says he saw a brilliantly lighted back window and cat-footed up to it, peered in, and inside sees, quote, 3 men conferred anxiously amid a jungle of hothouse flowers, shrubs, and trees. And there he recognizes Mantissa. So they're in the flower shop conferring with the florist regarding the Judas tree that they're obtaining to smuggle the birth of Venus out of the Ufotzi.
Yeah, the florist is named Gadrulfi, which you might note, if you were extremely unfamiliar with anyone's name, might kind of resemble Godolphin. If you were not looking very carefully or listening very carefully to anyone's names, this will come up sooner than later.
So they're like having this debate, which I found very funny, with the florist, and they're like, no, we need another Judas tree.
Yeah, it seems like they've come to the realization that if the guards see them walk out with a big bush and then they notice this priceless painting is missing, that they will start looking for the people with the Judas tree. So they realize they need to buy a second Judas tree so that they can have it, I guess, conveniently stashed so that people stop looking for the Judas tree when they find the decoy. And they're now haggling over the price of the second Judas tree.
Of the 2-for-1 BOGO deal.
We didn't mention this earlier in the first Mantissa section. There's a very funny line when they're like, no, we have to steal the painting today because we've already hollowed out the Judas tree and it's gonna die.
We don't want the flowers to die.
It's gonna start dying soon, so we have to do it right now. Which I think
Cesare has just been spending the whole day hollowing out this tree.
Yeah, it's sort of, I think them, they put the cart before the horse a couple of times now, but I just thought that was very funny. And it's funny here again that they're like sort of on like a last run through of the plan. They're like, oh no, we need to buy a second tree.
And Mantissa is still very adamant about this tree business. He's like, we must not let the Gaucho intimidate us. We may have to use his bomb, but we shall also have the Judas trees, the lion and the fox. So he is insistent that these Judas trees are key to the plan.
Did y'all look up, or do you already know what a Judas tree is or why it's called a Judas tree?
I looked up a visual of it.
Yeah, I saw that it is called a Judas tree because Judas supposedly hung himself from a tree of this species, although I think, that's contested as to why this specific species is called a Judas tree. But yeah, I didn't look too much into it besides that.
No, that was it. That was a fun fact.
It's got sort of purple flowers.
Not entirely fun fact that I was going to share at this juncture.
I like the idea.
It's kind of like
them,
a red bud.
You say so. I liked the sort of hybrid idea of this plan where they're like, we might have to use the dynamite, in which case they would blow the bars off the window and then push the tree through the window because it's less conspicuous to leave that way.
It's a kind of a good plan. They're thinking of everything.
Is it a good plan? I don't know.
It is a good enough plan that when Hugh Godolphin is like, I need a way out of the city tonight, that, his buddy Mantissa is like, great news. We have a way out of the city tonight. All you need to do is be at this place at this time. We're going to have a tree with us, but you don't need to worry about that part. And we're going to get on this boat.
So now, Godolphin's in on the heist, or at least the latter part of it.
Cesare is drinking more wine and singing old revolutionary songs.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a revelation at the start of section 7 that the Englishman who had questioned the Gaucho was none other than Sidney Stencil.
What are the odds?
It's all coming together.
Something's coming together. I'm not sure if it is all
coming together.
It is all coming together, Patrick.
Coming together. And this is where we get introduced to Sidney's idea of the situation.
Ooh, this is something.
I love the situation. So Eigenvalue mentions, I think, the situation at one point when he's ragging on Herbert back in the present. But we get, from Sidney's perspective now, a more thorough explanation of what the situation is.
Yeah, he says, oh, the situation, the bloody situation. In his more philosophical moments, he would wonder about this abstract entity, the situation, its idea, the details of its mechanism, which reminded me a bit of Benny Profane's Abstract Street, also a capital S.
I think that's true. Should we read, let's see, where's a little bit more?
He says that he decided long ago that no situation had any objective reality. It only existed in the minds of those who had happened to be in on it at any specific moment. Since these several minds tended to form a sum total or complex, more mongrel than homogeneous, the situation must necessarily appear to a single observer, much like a diagram in 4 dimensions to an eye conditioned to seeing its world in only 3.
Have either of you read the book Flatland?
I've seen the Carl Sagan explanation of Flatland.
Yeah, I'm aware of Flatland.
This reminded me of that while we're talking about sort of mathematical references.
Dimensionality.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say I thought that this book was going to end with a really succinct, this is who V is and exactly what V is. Like, it's not going to do that, obviously. But I do think this description of situations not having any objective reality really is the nail in the coffin to potentially having a strict definition of what V is at the end. I also think it's really funny for Sidney to be like, no one can ever truly know what's going on, when it becomes clear later that he's just really bad at his job of being an intelligence officer, and he just can't write a cohesive report that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of our first explicit insights into the kind of postmodern impulse that many critics and commentators would define as one of the cruxes of the Pynchon-esque worldview, the idea that it is impossible ever to actually get to the center of anything, because that center just implies some other tangent that is connected to a whole other apparatus or a whole other system that requires its own sort of untangling. And there's this endless deferral of meaning that is only cognizable in a local context, that, we can only understand a kind of situation by thinking of the people for whom the situation is true, and then trying to work backwards from there, rather than thinking about any kind of singular objective perspective that aligns everyone's viewpoints.
Yeah, and I think his writing really makes that clear. Like the fact that we're hearing about whatever this situation is from so many different perspectives and taking on perspectives of people, especially like in chapter 3, who we may not even think are relevant to the plot, but we're seeing their sort of interior perspectives of the situation.
Yeah, it's a really interesting formal and thematic connection, I think, that is made there. I mean, even here, we're saying that, like, this is Sidney Stencil explaining his worldview, but it is kind of Sidney Stencil explaining his worldview as implied through an impression that we are getting sort of secondhand from a dentist / analyst who doesn't really believe in this particular framing of events in the first place. I'm obsessed with the situation. It also led to, as the book says, a near obsession with teamwork. That there is also, this is turned in Sidney's case into a kind of managerial strategy for conducting bureaucratic espionage, where he's like, and that's why we like really all need to be on the same page here, guys.
Yeah, it says he was at his best working in front of a chorus line.
The success or failure of any diplomatic issue must vary directly with the degree of rapport achieved by the team confronting it. Which, saying it out loud now, kind of reminds me of the way that Zeitzus organizes the alligator patrol in this sort of like failed approach at team building and camaraderie, that he wishes he were a union organizer, but instead he's wrangling a crew of bums into this ill-begotten and failing municipal public works project.
They're dismantling it strategically, Patrick. It didn't just be successful at removing the alligators and then no longer be needed.
That's true.
And so they come up with this plan to let the younger Godolphin go and follow him to Schweissvogel's, where he's going to meet with his dad. So once again, everything going down at the German beer garden.
They mentioned that the department that Stencil works for had kept a dossier for some time on Hugh Godolphin, and that the name Vaisu occurred in that, but that they had lost the dossier and then had to sort of reconstruct it.
Yeah, and they also get things completely wrong, such as thinking that Gadrulfi, the name of the florist, is actually the alias that the younger Godolphin has been operating under, because they just sort of misconstrue these kinds of details, or they are working from and analyzing a different situation than the one that is unfolding for the rest of the Godolphin crew.
They are not unlike the younger Stencil sort of constructing a conspiracy where perhaps there is no conspiracy. Like Evan Godolphin does not seem to be bought into his dad's conspiracy. He's just like heard childhood tales of Vaisu.
And he has no idea why people are calling him Gadrulfi.
Yeah, so they are clearly, constructing more of a conspiracy around Godolphin the younger than actually exists.
As I believe this is this the Gaucho who says this? Oh yeah, this is Godolphin talking to the Gaucho in the cell. They think I am in on it, and you. Why else, if they're going to release us anyway, did they throw us into the same cell? We'll be followed wherever we go. Here we are in the thick of a grand cabal, and we haven't the slightest notion of what's going on.
It's also where you see that they believe that Vaisu is a code name for Venezuela. Again, seemingly because they picked up the Gaucho, and he just thought he was correcting them when they said, "What is Vaisu?" And he said, "Do you mean Venezuela?" And they've written down in the report, "Vaisu equals Venezuela?" ?
And it's sort of conferring about this connection is when Evan Godolphin starts talking about like, oh yeah, boy, do I know about Vaisu. Before I went to sleep, my dad would tell me all these things about like the iridescent spider monkeys and the human sacrifices and all of the wild, unspeakable colors that he witnessed when he was over in Vaisu. But he had always imagined it as exactly this kind of bedtime story that his father, the world explorer would tell him about. But then as he grew into an adult, he started realizing that his father actually 100% bought into all of it, that he was under the impression that these were bedtime stories, but he comes to realize that, like, no, his dad was trying to tell him something in a serious way through these tales.
And he makes sort of a deal with or not really a deal, but the Gaucho asks him to take the message that he's written in his collar to, what is his name?
Cuerna Cabron.
Yeah.
Cuerna Cabron, who will also be at Schweissvogel's. So Godolphin agrees to take this message on behalf of the Gaucho, who the Stencil and co. have already agreed that they will kind of let the Gaucho escape in order to also follow him and see what he does.
Yeah, the Gaucho comes up with this whole plan that when the guard comes around the next time that they're going to overpower him and steal the keys and break out. And then the guard just comes and unlocks the cell and is like, you two are free to go.
Yeah, he specifically is like, just put down the like piece of wood that you're carrying. Like it's fine. You can just leave. Should we take a break here before diving into how to cook a squid?
That sounds good.
Sure.
I could use a stretch.
Yeah. Let's take a break. Pynchon Pals. We'll be right back after this. All right, welcome back. Section 8. New Pynchon Pals cookbook recipe coming in hot. Fried squid.
Fried squid. I wrote this one down.
At least this is a real meal, unlike the last couple of entries we put in.
I was on the airplane when I was reading this, and I was kind of on the airplane during dinner time. I'm going to be honest, this squid made me quite hungry.
Yeah, we were introduced to Ferrante, an Italian who is involved in some espionage goings-on.
Also a neo-Machiavellian.
As he says it. And he is plotting to assassinate Umberto I, the king of Italy, who would, very shortly after the events of this chapter, be assassinated in 1900. And he's got a squid.
He also says he knows the foreign service in Italy is irreparably corrupt and nitwit. I agree, Ferrante.
Hot takes about the Italian Foreign Service in 1899, or modern day. Only on Pynchon Pals. But he's wandering around the secret police headquarters, and he has a small squid in one hand, looking for some place to cook it. He just bought it from the market. It was for supper. So this hub of spy activity in Florence was on the second floor of a factory that made sort of Renaissance and medieval era musical instrument facsimiles. So they're recreating the musical instruments of old, and it is run by this Austrian named Vogt, V-O-G-T, and he encounters Vogt's mother hanging out on the in the upper floors of this building.
I mean, we get the real slapstick when he hears the noise of this instrument playing, and it's, I guess, pretty piercing. So he naturally drops to his knees and begins crawling around and then peering behind things until he sees this old lady playing a viola da gamba. Yeah,
still with the squid.
Three points of contact, one hand holding the squid.
And then he runs into the woman and says, 1,000 pardons, Senora. I did not mean to interrupt the music. I was wondering if I might borrow a skillet and some oil, my supper. And he waved the squid at her placatingly.
Then they kind of have a conversation about the spycraft going on here, and it becomes clear that no one exactly has any idea what's actually going on here. Again, the wires of the various situations are crossed. The woman is calling the younger Godolphin young Godrulfi, and Ferrante is replying, no, Godrulfi is a florist who is like in town. We know Godrulfi. He's associated with the partners of the Gaucho. And then they converge on, again, this word visu that keeps cropping up. And the old Austrian woman starts talking about the barbaric and unknown race employed by God knows whom, who are even now blasting the Antarctic ice with dynamite, preparing to enter a subterranean network of natural tunnels, a network whose existence is known only to the inhabitants of Visu, the Royal Geographic Society in London, Herr Godolphin, and the spies of Florence. And she is convinced that Visu is in fact a code word for Vesuvius, because this is all about sort of a secret tunnel and volcano network that is being employed across the globe.
Ferrante takes that is very surprisingly, because she's paraphrasing the memo that Stencil sent to London. So that's Stencil's official description of what is going on. Dynamite, secret tunnels through the mountain, Vesuvius.
Choice little subtle Avatar reference there.
Yeah, thank you. That was a good one.
I like this weird little interaction. On the one hand, it is like funny that is taking place over this like sizzling squid. But on the other hand, it provides a nice little, I think, to Pynchon's credit, like as an author and as someone who I think recognizes that the pacing of a really dense chapter like this can get kind of difficult. Like this moment begins to feel like a little bit of a breather in a way that is kind of refreshing, where almost like in a Shakespeare play or something, you get two comic relief characters who come in to kind of comment on the current state of affairs and then disappear as we return to the main action just afterwards.
I like that framing. And I think, yeah, similar to how they're sort of commenting on the state of affairs, like they make it clear that this espionage situation is just like not at all cut and dry. Like, nobody knows what Vesu is. People are coming up with some elaborate tales. Different people have different opinions. Is Vesu Venezuela? Is it Vesuvius? Is it Venus? There are so many V's going on here.
And I know Ferrante is just like a common Italian name, but do you think Elena Ferrante is a fan of Thomas Pynchon? Elena Ferrante, if you're listening to Pynchon Pals and you want to come on the podcast, come on anytime.
PynchonPals@gmail.com. We can rearrange our schedules. I mean, Ferrante lived in Florence, I think. I mean, I guess we don't know, but her characters have lived in Florence. So she might be.
She might be. After this brief scene, we return to the image of Victoria, who is standing at this T-shaped intersection, not a V-shaped intersection, of the Via del Purgatorio and the Via dell'Inferno, waiting for the young Godolphin to emerge from jail. She, for her part, on the strength of, quote, a unique and private gloss on the prince, overrated virtu, individual agency, in much the same way Signor Mantissa overrated the fox. So she is one of these people. Virtu in the prince comes up as this like ideal characteristic, not exactly of virtue in the sense that we think of virtuousness, but virtue in the sense of being able to cause an effect on the world. So in the same way that the word virtual kind of means in effect, if not in actuality, this is related to that sense of the word virtue. And it also ultimately derives from vir in Latin, meaning like man or manliness. So there's this masculine relationship between affecting the world and one's own masculine character that Victoria, for her part, is particularly interested in. And she is, at the same time as she's waiting for the young Godolphin to emerge from jail, she's thinking about the older Godolphin, who she presumably recently slept with. And she starts thinking about why she seems particularly attracted to men in their like 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah, she says, she kind of talks about ancestral memory, which I feel like is also maybe a callback to this. Like,
sorry, that's ancestral memory, not incestral memory.
Isn't that what I said?
That is what she said, but I just heard it as like ancestral
really,
memory, and we were just talking about fathers and sons.
Yeah.
Ancestral memory.
I want to make sure the listener didn't also hear that.
ancestral memory, which I thought was kind of a callback to this like psychoanalysis, like Freudian Jungian approach. She says an inherited reservoir of primordial knowledge which shapes certain of our actions and causal desires, and then talks about how she's here between purgatory and hell at the intersection of these two streets.
It also kind of calls back to Rachel's argument against Schoonmaker in the plastic surgery in chapter 2.
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, way back when the sort of like relationship between the gene pool versus kind of the cultural knowledge and cultural assumptions that are passed on in kind of like a super egoistic mode, I guess you could say, if we're now bringing Freud into the equation. She's also considering how dormant in every aged man she saw rather his image regressed 20 or 30 years, like a wraith which nearly merged the outlines with its counterpart, young, potent, possessing mighty sinews and sensitive hands. So that in Captain Hugh, it had been the young version she wished to help and make part of the vast system of channels, locks, and basins she had dug for the rampant river Fortune.
Yeah, and she returns to this idea of the wraith in the next paragraph, describing it as a spiritual double. The son is a doppelganger to the father, which kind of reminded me, calling back to like our previous discussion of mirrors and doubles and sort of like personalities splitting.
I think it also sort of fits in with her trying to sleep with Jesus when she mentions that once you've accepted a duality, that it's only a single-stepped trinity.
Yeah, so in that every time she sleeps with a man, she is also sleeping with kind of the younger, most idealized version of that man, and also sleeping with her Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. She witnesses the effective actual doppelganger of the man she has just slept with, the young Godolphin, step out of the jail.
I wonder what Stencil, the younger, is sort of thinking of this. I mean, I don't know if Victoria ends up sleeping with Stencil the elder. It's possible.
I mean, we know Stencil the elder is obsessed with AV.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I just think it's an interesting discussion of like, when she sleeps with the father, she sleeps with the son. Like, what implications does that have?
And she sleeps with the Holy Ghost.
And what implications does that have for the younger Stencil, who's the one who's kind of imagining and retelling this whole story?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. As they are walking away from the jail, they start to have conversations about the sort of radioactive decay of the Renaissance that pervades Florence, that you've got all these Titians and Botticellis and the ghosts of the Medici they talk about, but it's all dissipated and faded as if it were all made of radium and decaying over time.
I think that connects back to our running theme of things sort of like glowing, like the mercury glow of the lights in previous chapters. They talk about a glow about old Firenze seems to be missing, seems more leaden gray. Perhaps the only radiance left is in Visu. So there's this kind of running theme of like radiance, irradiance, glowing. Almost unnatural glowing.
And Visu is described as this place with like unnaturally bright, radiant, iridescent color. Or maybe not unnaturally, but like supernaturally.
Radioactively.
So
we hit kind of a action sequence at some point.
Yeah, we jump back to the Figli di Machiavelli, the sons of Machiavelli.
They're at their tobacco warehouse where they have a weapons depot, and one of the members, Gaucho, is doing his nightly checks when another member, Tito, comes in to tell him that the members of the Italian military are marching to the Venezuelan consulate.
Yeah, no one has heard from Caracas yet about this riot that's supposed to be happening. There's some concern that they haven't heard from the Gaucho either, and maybe he's actually been working with the Italians all along.
And then we find ourselves in the next section back at Scheissvogel's.
Yes. Just after, I guess we should say, at the end of that, the Gaucho, in order to kind of like convince everyone of his power and virtue in a Machiavellian sense, says that the Knight of the Lion has come again to Florence, and like tonight's the night, boys. We're doing this thing.
I guess what we didn't talk about in the section with the Venezuelan consulate members is that they specifically have called in the Italian police because the Italian police can't help them once they're on Venezuelan property of the consulate, so they need them to surround the consulate to make sure that they prevent the Gaucho and his people from getting to the consulate.
So we find ourselves back at a beer garden.
Willkommen.
Once again, full of blonde barmaids. And several of our cast of characters are here. We have the elder Godolphin and Mantisa, who are sitting at a small table.
Yes, we've got the younger Godolphin is on his way here with the message written on the Gaucho's collar that he was given in the cell for Cabron.
And meanwhile, Godolphin and Mantisa are chatting once again about Visu. He's describing Visu to Mantisa. He's saying that he's being pursued by agents.
Yeah, Godolphin is continuing on this theme of like tourism versus exploration. He says, I think it is the opposite of what sends English reeling all over the globe in the mad dances called Cook's Tours. They want only the skin of the place. The explorer wants its heart. It is perhaps a little like being in love. I had never penetrated to the heart of any of those wild places, Raff, until Vesu. It was not until the southern expedition last year that I saw what was beneath her skin. And then Mantisa asked, what did you see? Nothing, Godolphin whispered. It was nothing I saw.
Yeah, that nothing comes back up a little bit later when he's talking about Visu in relation to the Antarctic. He says, Visu itself, a gaudy dream of what the Antarctic in this world is closest to, a dream of annihilation.
Yeah, so the actual story that he relates is that he gets to the South Pole, and he is confessing this to Mantisa because England and the world all over believes that he has failed in his mission to actually set foot on the South Pole, but he says he's done it. And the reason that he didn't tell everyone is because amidst this barren, desolate ice field, he gets to the South Pole and digs down into the ice beneath him because he sees something there. And according to him, he finds an iridescent
spider monkey.
The spider monkey, yes, that's the word.
Corpse of a spider monkey.
Yeah, he finds this buried iridescent spider monkey in the ice, and it freaks him out.
Yeah, he's specifically done this push in midwinter because he feels the need to stand at the South Pole where he is not spinning around the Earth to try and catch his bearings about his thoughts on Visu's riddle. And
there's a lot of talks of gyration and like spinning, which reminds me of our clock.
Yeah, he's at the center of the clock face.
Mm-hmm.
And finds this spider monkey, allegedly. And he believes that this has been like placed there for him, that this is part of the globe-spanning game that the people of Visu are playing against him.
And so Mantisa is doubting this a little bit. He's like, are you sure, Hugh? I've heard in the polar regions that men, after long exposure, see things, which... So he's kind of thinking that maybe his buddy has been hallucinating a little bit after, being in the middle of Antarctica in the winter. Not so sure that this is a real story, which I can understand.
Seems unlikely.
Highly unlikely that he would find this sort of rainbow-colored spider monkey in the ice in the center of Antarctica.
The rainbow-colored spider monkey reminds me of the monkeys from The Wizard of Oz in a big way.
A little bit, although I picture them as sort of prettier.
These ones is prettier?
Yeah. Anyways, Evan rolls up with Victoria, so we've got two more of our characters, and they come over, and it goes father, and the elder Godolphin goes son.
Then Evan says that he's got the message from the Gaucho for Cabron, and Cesare knows who that is, and lets him know that they should all be there soon as well.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Moffat, who is employed by Sidney Stencil, is watching all of this. So everyone's at the beer garden.
Except for the Gaucho himself and the rest of the Venezuelans, who have begun their march down via Cavour.
Yeah, they've Gaucho and Tito have done a raid on the local cavalry barracks and stolen several hundred horses. So this is a fairly big operation, and they are riding to the consulate. They've also been supplied by lots of rotten fruits and vegetables from their friends at the Mercado Centrale, and they're really ready to have a riot.
And so when they get to the consulate, the Gaucho catches sight, which I just think this is very funny. He catches sight of Cesare and Senor Mentisa carrying the 2 Judas trees, and it's like, oh shit. These guys.
Now they have 2 trees.
Now they have 2 trees. And he's like, I got to leave this riot for a while. I got to go deal with this situation. They have 2 trees. I don't know what's going on. They need my help.
There's this great moment as the gang is progressing down the street where like we keep seeing these other characters we've encountered, like Salazar and Raton are like looking out the window nervously at the mob that is kind of approaching the consulate. Like, it really does feel like we've built, again, this kind of mosaic perspective on the situation going on in Florence, and now all of those characters and perspectives are converging into one place at one time, into a big street brawl once again.
This is our Cairo Opera House, but it's the street in Florence. Also, I wanted to point out that the Gaucho is in a red shirt here, I'm pretty sure, which is a Garibaldi reference again.
Yeah, the sort of intersection of, and Grant's companion to V mentions this as well, there's a not exactly straight but fairly direct line between, as you might imagine, the Italian nationalist unification impulse and what would a few short decades later turn into sort of like the Italian fascist nationalist movement. So a lot of these heroes of the Italian unification would later also become kind of iconographic of Italianicity in a way that would propagate Mussolini's regime and claim to power. That I think Pynchon is playing with some of those colors a little bit in the sort of world historical foreshadowing.
I'm getting a sense that fascism is maybe a running theme in
Yeah, and
works.
specifically the way that like 20th century fascism arises out of a 19th century imagining of nationalism and empire, I think is a running theme here.
So after he spots the folks with the 2 Judas trees, we kind of switch to their perspectives, and we're kind of with Mentisa and Cesare and Victoria and Evan Godolphin. And
I appreciate that Victoria is just kind of like continuing to hang out with these guys.
Yeah, well, she's excited by this whole situation.
This is the most fun she's had since Cairo.
Absolutely. She's like, will there be shooting? And Evan Godolphin thinks that she's scared, but it says he did not hear her eagerness, only her fear. So I think she's excited for the action to break loose.
I love Victoria. What a freak.
Truly a character.
Setting up a crazy pace for herself. It's almost it's so embarrassing. I can't think of this character who I'm trying to think.
The last time that I said I would chop up the silence for when you thought of your punchline, I didn't actually cut it because it was much funnier if I didn't. But this time, don't worry. I definitely will.
I'm gonna get there, guys. I'm gonna get there.
You're just making it funnier to leave it in as you go. You're not helping your case.
What's the Tom Hanks movie about the guy who's at every major historical event of the 70s, 80s, and 90s? Forrest Gump.
Toy Story.
Forrest Gump. It's Forrest Gump. Victoria is Forrest Gump.
Okay, yes. Astute point. I see why you took pains to get there. I do think you were kind of onto something.
She's the Forrest Gump of the collapse of the English Empire.
Damn. I think you just cracked what V actually is about.
Wow.
That's good.
So she watches this like riot play out. There's like blood staining the pavement. People are shooting each other. And she's just standing there sort of like placid, emotionless, watching this sort of like violent scene play out in the square. And there's this great description of her comb once again From her hair, the heads of 5 crucified also looked on, no more expressive than she.
Yeah, at first reading the description of the comb, I was like, oh, it's sort of like shaped like crosses or crucifixes. But I do think Pynchon makes sure that we know that this is an actual carving of like crucified British soldiers, like in pith helmets and, in the full getup.
What a morbid comb to wear in one's hair.
Yeah, but it would catch your eye if you were walking by it in a market stall. You'd be like, that's interesting.
That's interesting.
I mean, it said it was carved by one of the artisans of the modest. So that would have been, it's sort of been a victory thing, right? It'd been like, look what we did to these English guys.
Yeah.
Celebratory, like a t-shirt.
Yeah, it's
at a
interesting
concert.
that like Victoria, who seems very like enmeshed in the English establishment, is wearing this comb that like depicts the crucifixion of English soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is also part of the imperial impulse, which is like that even your defeats speak to the heroism of your conquests. That like, that just speaks to the shrewdness and the effectiveness of your opponent for when you eventually defeat them.
Do we want to talk about the failed heist?
Yeah, they're doing a heist.
I was so disappointed.
It's so close to being
so close
to pulling it off.
I know.
Midway through, Cesare has already pierced the painting and is cutting the canvas out of the frame. Mantiza sort of suddenly has inspiration, and I think this sort of goes back to earlier when we were talking about his life being so gray. It talks about light shining in suddenly and him sort of seeing the world in a new light that reminds him of the spider monkey from Godolphin's story. And he just sort of puts a hand on Cesare's back and has him stop cutting out the painting. And they don't go through with it.
Aspetta, he shouted, leaning forward to grab Cesare's hand. Sei pazzo, Cesare snarled. Wait, are you crazy?
Yeah, and then they just leave without the painting. He decided he didn't want it anymore.
Yeah, what do they do with the trees? I want to make sure, I want to keep track of these trees. Do they just leave them in the room? Is that right? Because then the guards come in and they see sort of 2 inexplicable Judas trees next to the painting. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's correct.
There's a little, when the Gaucho sees them in sort of the earlier half of this section, he makes a comment to himself, 2 trees. He's also not aware that they've gone back to the florist for a second potted plant.
And so the Gaucho ends up, like, the guards come for them. The Gaucho ends up shooting at the guards.
He does indeed use some of his grenades.
Yeah, even though they didn't end up taking the painting. And then they stage a getaway.
Sans the Gaucho.
Plus Godolphin.
Yeah, as they're leaving, the Gaucho sort of returns to leaving the art gallery, specifically the Uffizi. The Gaucho returns to his people, and Moffat and Stencil are sort of in the crowd, and they see Godolphin leaving, and Stencil stands Moffat down and says that he just received a message from London from the chief of the Foreign Office, and that they're no longer supposed to pursue Godolphin, or maybe Visu as a larger entity.
This is after Moffat was, quote, knocked sprawling by a not-so-rotten turnip.
Yeah. The merchants at the Centrale provided a lot of, originally it said rotten fruits and vegetables, perhaps just fruits and vegetables.
I just thought that added to our Looney Tunes imagery of being sort of like the secret police is sort of knocked flat by this turnip that's thrown at him.
Yeah, so this is where the barge is waiting for them. The captain jumps off and was like, whoa. There was supposed to be one person who was supposed to be getting on this barge, basically. And they, in response, leap from their carriage, pick up the captain, and throw him into the river.
And then there's this really funny line after they've gone through with this, where they're like, can anyone pilot a barge? We just threw the captain off.
And Godolphin, member of the Royal Navy, says, it's like a man of war, only smaller and no sails. Son, would you cast off?
Which feels very much of a piece with the line of what is Fashoda? It's like Munich, but in the jungle.
There's
I feel like that's a particular kind of funny construction that Pynchon likes to use.
There's a section a little bit earlier. I don't remember the exact quote, but Godolphin says something about like, he's like, you can tack, you can steer, but you're going to hit it anyway.
Thomas Pynchon was in the Navy. You know that?
He knows how to tack.
He wants you to know that. He knows how to tack.
He knows what a barge is.
Yeah, and so Cesare sort of concludes the chapter thinking about, quote, what an amusing world it still is, where things and people can be found in places where they do not belong, and kind of pictures, all of them on this barge as sort of an amusing group of folks that are on this barge where they don't really belong, and then thinking back in the Uffizi to how there's this hollow Judas tree just sitting in front of the birth of Venus. So he kind of concludes thinking about the amusingness of the world.
Yeah, and Victoria is left by the gang, standing sort of amidst the brawl, kind of watching it, because Evan decides to follow his father onto the barge.
They brought her with her. She couldn't be at the next set of impersonations.
That's true. Yeah, we have to see where she shows up next.
There was a passage in this chapter that we didn't talk about that
return us there.
I would like to return to.
Ferry us away.
Before we wrap up. It was towards the beginning of the chapter, just like 2 or 3 pages in. We're still with Eigenvalue, the dentist. It's sort of the conclusion of our time with the dentist. And Eigenvalue is reflecting on history. And I'll just read this short passage because I think it kind of connects to what we were talking about, the multidimensionality and how we like see history from like a certain perspective, and there is no one, truth to the situation. Eigenvalue thinks, perhaps history this century, thought Eigenvalue, is rippled with gathers in its fabric, such that if we are situated, as stencils seem to be, at the bottom of a fold, it's impossible to determine warp, woof, or pattern anywhere else. By virtue, however, of existing in one gather, it is assumed that there are others compartmented off into sinuous cycles, each of which comes to assume greater importance than the weave itself and destroys any continuity. Thus it is that we are charmed by the funny-looking automobiles of the 30s, the curious fashions of the 20s, the peculiar moral habits of our grandparents. We produce and attend musical comedies about them and are conned into a false memory, a phony nostalgia about what they were. We are accordingly lost to any sense of a continuous tradition. Perhaps if we lived on a crest, things would be different. We could at least see. And so I actually drew myself a little diagram of this sort of folded
sine wave.
Yeah, a sine wave essentially, and stencil is sort of situated at the valley of this sine wave, and Eigenvalue is thinking about if we were actually at the crest of the sine wave, we could maybe have a greater vision of history, or a somewhat more accurate vision of history that's not this phony nostalgia, or we're trying to reinvent what happened but we can't see.
Well, I mean, the particular example that he gives reminds me a lot of the helpful context that Andrew provided back in our first episode, that the cool import car that Rachel is driving around the Catskills, even though it's a new model, resembles one of these 1930s roadsters much more than it does anything that is extremely contemporary, which feels like precisely this kind of regurgitated nostalgia a little bit that she finds particularly attractive.
The fashion of the 20s, that's also Benny sort of thinking back and being nostalgic for the decade of his birth when he's wearing Mr. Mendoza's suit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just found this passage to be kind of resonant, and just thinking about nostalgia and how we think about history in the past, and maybe romanticize it a little bit, or believe or tell sort of false stories about the past that maybe obfuscate some of the stuff that was really going on, or are told from a particular perspective and obscure other perspectives. And I feel like some of what Pynchon is maybe getting at here is, these different perspectives on colonialism or history, or the rise of fascism, or the fall of empire. And we might be familiar with one maybe romanticized or nostalgic perspective, but he's kind of complicating the situation and showing all of these different facets or dimensions or perspectives on particular situations in history.
History, and also a particular kind of closure of future possibilities that, like, in the valley of this sine wave, you're kind of like looking up in both directions toward the past and the future, and it resembles kind of where you are right now, or your present is kind of colored by the folding in on both sides of the past and the future, which is something that theorists and critics of post-modernity, like the great Frederick Jameson, R.I.P., writes about in his book Postmodernism, or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, this kind of foreclosure of possibility and perpetual return to a kind of pastiche nostalgia of referentiality. Everything is kind of referring to things that already were. You imagine the future is continually stretching out as a continuation of the present, that I think Pynchon is also wrestling with back here in this book that came out in the 1960s, but would later, become part of this broader postmodern push in American literature, or would later come to be read as being part of this postmodern wave. Any final thoughts about this chapter?
Good chapter.
I liked it. Yeah.
A lot of good action. I assume the fact that we've now seen 2 of these means there'll be at least 1 or 2 more impersonation chapters, and I'm excited to see where they go from here.
Yeah, I have to say that I think she hangs on the Western Wall, just an all-timer chapter title. I don't know what exactly it is about that phrasing, but it works for me. So next time on Pynchon Pals, we will be reading chapters 8 and 9. Once again, it's roughly 50 pages. That's chapter 8, in which Rachel gets her yo-yo back, Rooney sings a song, and Stencil calls on bloody chiclets. Chiclets! And we will also be reading chapter 9, which is called, if I can find it in my book, Mondaugen's Story. So we'll be reading both of those for next time. Once again, that'll be in about 2 weeks from the time you are listening to this, if you are listening to it on the day it comes out. Thank you for listening to Pynchon Pals. Thank you to Andrew Tillett.
Thank you.
And Duri Long.
Thank you very much
for joining me this fine morning. If you like what we're doing here, we would love it if you left us a review on Apple Podcasts or on your podcatcher of choice. Hey, if you leave a particularly great review, we might even read it out on the show. So, these kinds of metrics are the number one way that you can help us grow the thing we're doing here. Word of mouth is also great. If you have friends who you think would like Thomas Pynchon, or would like a podcast about people talking about Thomas Pynchon, do let them know. We are not paying for advertising in any way for this podcast, so word of mouth and reviews are the number one way that you can help us out. You can also help us out by giving us more things to talk about, by emailing us at pynchonpals@gmail.com. We would really like to do a Q&A thing, or sort of discussion based on what y'all would like us to talk about, or if there are things that you would like to even correct us on, or if there are things that we missed out talking about the first time, let us know. And perhaps, especially towards the end of V, before we hop into the Crying Blot 49, we might do something related to those emails. Our theme music is Horology by the inimitable King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, released under a Creative Commons Attribution No Derivatives license on the album Polygondwanaland. Pynchon Pals is produced and edited by me, Patrick Fiorilli. You can find more of my work alongside my newsletter, Critical Theory Craft, at my website, www.patf.io. Until next time, see you later, alligators. Welcome back to a quick little bonus thing that is coming now at the end of the podcast. Thank you for listening to what just occurred. We had a lot of great fun talking about Chapter 7. But now we have all officially seen, one battle after another, the latest film from Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Benicio del Toro and Chase Infinity.
Sean Penn.
Sean Penn.
And
Tiana Taylor. Yeah, just give the whole lineup, the whole bill, the whole sick crew. It's a good movie.
I
like this film.
Very fun.
It's my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movie that I've seen to date.
Yeah, so Duri, I know you've seen a couple. Andrew, have you watched any Paul Thomas Anderson films before?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're culturally literate. You're down with the PTA.
Pizza, the porn one. There's some good
Boogie
ones.
Nights.
Boogie Nights. Yeah, I couldn't think of what it's called. Yes, I've seen several. Not all of them by any means.
And Duri, you have seen
Inherent Vice and There Will Be Blood.
I've seen There Will Be Blood. I forget about that one. I try to forget about that one.
Damn, all right.
I was not a big fan of Inherent Vice. There Will Be Blood was
You realize
something.
you're on a podcast about Thomas Pynchon, so we may have to revisit.
I know. I'm open to rewatching. But I did really enjoy One Battle After Another. So
yeah, so for context, I guess we should say this discussion will probably have some spoilers. So if you have not seen the movie yet, you can quit listening right now. We will likely be talking about this movie again once we have all read Vineland in some time. So stick around for that, as we might also revisit Inherent Vice after reading that book. But I my main impression coming away from this movie, I wrote about a little bit on a newsletter piece that I put out, I guess a couple weeks ago by the time this essay is coming out, or by the time this episode is coming out. In that introduction I mentioned to Slow Learner, Pynchon talks about how he kind of filled the original version of chapter 3 when it was a short story called Under the Rose with like some chase scenes and stuff. And he talks about how, for better or for worse, he really likes Roadrunner and like Wile E. Coyote cartoons, and like the chase scene, as he says, is something for which, quote, I remain a dedicated sucker. It is the one piece of puerility I'm unable to let go of. And I was thinking about that quote as we were reading chapter 7, which is filled with these kind of Looney Tunes-esque chase scenes. But I also think this movie, One Battle After Another, in a way that kind of reminded me of Mad Max Fury Road, is like one big chase scene featuring a Wile E. Coyote, like a ethno-nationalist Wile E. Coyote chasing down a bunch of revolutionary roadrunners.
Yeah, and go ahead, Andrew.
I agree with Patrick. I read that piece that it came out before I saw One Battle After Another, and I was like, well, I can't read it because I have to see the movie first. And then I went and saw the movie, and then I came back and read that, and I agreed to your synopsis there. I was thinking a lot about a couple of other films during it. Have you guys seen How to Blow Up a Pipeline?
Not yet.
No.
Woman at War?
No.
Those are both. Those are two other movies about, in those cases, both sort of terrorism as direct action. How to Blow Up a Pipeline is about a bunch of young people in Texas blowing up a pipeline, and Woman at War is an Icelandic-Ukrainian film about a woman sabotaging like an iron or steel plant. I was thinking both.
How to Blow Up a Pipeline, based on the nonfiction book by the same name by Andreas Malm.
Yes. Yeah, the movie's fictional. But I think sort of How to Blow Up a Pipeline has a lot of similar setting, obviously like West Texas and sort of Southern California areas. Woman at War, I think, also deals a lot with sort of the same issues of sort of motherhood and activism. I really liked Tiana Taylor's character as sort of a one-for-one of like Assata Shakur. Minus, I don't think Assata Shakur ratted anyone out to the feds ever, but a similar sort of a mother who continues to do what she thinks is correct and is eventually jailed and then becomes free. So yeah, that was what I spent a lot of time thinking about during that movie. On top of the like Benicio del Toro, sort of Wes Anderson type character that he was, where suddenly everyone is calling him Sensei all the time, and the skateboarding guys, they were awesome.
Incredible performance by Benicio del Toro in this movie.
Oh yeah, him and Sean Penn is like white nationalist Popeye the Sailor. Amazing.
He's Popeye the Sailor, but also seems to be doing, I couldn't help but like think the whole way through, his best sort of RFK impression, like down to the like the he has this really particular kind of like modern day MAGA strut going on, which is presumably related to the lifts that he puts in his shoes, as one character points out. But just this like, if you can't imagine what sort of like a fascist sachet would look like, pay attention to when you go see this movie, to the way Sean Penn moves through the world.
I don't know if it's just because I've been steeped in V, because I realize obviously this movie was not based off of V, but I felt like I saw a lot of similarities to many of the characters that we've encountered in V. Leonardo DiCaprio kind of reminded me a little bit of, I don't know, some amalgamation of like these like spy characters that are like bumbling and falling over things. It was giving kind of like Porpentine at certain moments, or this like idea of the fool, where he's, not really well equipped to tackle the situation. Like 15 years in, he's sort of deteriorated and like can't keep up in the chase scenes and like falls off the roof.
Yeah, Bob Ferguson Schlemiel.
Yeah.
Wishes he were a human yo-yo when he falls the fuck off a building.
Yeah. And then like the whole like skateboarding crew. I feel like I was reminded of some of the imagery and folks that we've met so far in V, in a variety of the different characters.
I'm assuming none of these characters' names come from Vineland, but
yeah, all
like,
of the names
Paul,
are changed. Yeah.
So like I think Paul Thomas Anderson, I assume based on what we've read in V, did a very good job of finding Pynchon-esque names for these characters. I mean, Perfidia Beverly Hills is very Pynchon. The Christmas Adventurers Club
very
seems
Pynchon.
about as Pynchon as you can get. The whole audience, I think, was cracking up on some of these names that got thrown out there, but they're excellent.
Yeah, of course, we should mention Jungle Pussy using her actual stage name, Jungle Pussy. She is a recording artist known by that stage name, so even there is sort of out Pynchon's Pynchon.
That's great casting. The casting director did an excellent job there.
There was a wave of laughter that I saw this in a very particular theater at like the 70 millimeter showing in Chicago. And there was a wave of laughter that swept across the theater just when Alana Haim's face showed up, and everyone was like, Alana Haim.
That's how I
from
felt
Haim
too.
and Licorice Pizza, which was very funny. And then there was you could hear a pin drop silence when Alana Haim was promptly brutally shot in the head shortly thereafter.
Yeah, I think when Alana Haim showed up, I was like, damn, I'm glad she finally gets to be cool in a Paul Thomas Anderson movie instead of hanging out with 14-year-old boys, which is also very V, now that we throw it like that.
Yeah.
She's not a Josefina? Fina?
Yeah, I mean, you sent us something about in our group chat about the parallels between V and The Master, which may be worth taking a look at after we finish this book. A movie I have seen, but had not placed into a context alongside of V, but in retrospect now, seems like there's a bunch of connections, down to a brief little anecdote I found that Paul Thomas Anderson wanted to include a scene of alligator hunting in the sewers in that movie, but it was cut from the script before they started filming it because it would have been a tax on the budget.
Yeah, I saw the movie at an Alamo Draft House. So for those of you unfamiliar, if you show up, they encourage you to show up before the movie because they've curated sort of 30 minutes of stuff beforehand that they were showing, and they were sort of doing a segment on how this film was done in VistaVision and also sort of iconic shots from other Paul Thomas Anderson films. And so I was sort of getting to watch that and then absolutely hunting it for Pynchon references.
Well, because one of the famous shots from The Master is Joaquin Phoenix sort of listlessly hanging over the crow's nest of a Navy destroyer, in a way that feels very Benny Profane.
Yeah, and then I think, just the fact that there are all these tunnels, secret societies. Every house seems to have like a secret exit built into it in this movie.
It's true.
We're getting into our kind of conspiratorial mindset, but there is actually like some truth. Not just some truth, like there is truth behind the conspiracy, and there's reason why all these people have tunnels.
Well, I think this is the anxiety that Pynchon is working through all the time, which is like a conspiracy sounds crazy until it isn't. Or a conspiracy sounds crazy until it is just the operation of a government in order to coordinately attack, oppress, and disenfranchise a group of people, and terrorize a group of people, which on like an individual scale feels like a sweeping conspiracy, but on like a scale of national policy is just that. Like, it's a matter of bureaucracy. And I think the movement between conspiracy and the operations of neoliberal government / empire is something that is all over the pages of V, and definitely on display in these scenes of American brutality and oppression at the hands of the soldiers and the detention camps that make up a large part of the scenic design in this film.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie, it was kind of hard to watch this film with everything that's happening currently. But I think we see that, almost that transformation in the eyes of, is it Willa?
Yeah.
Did I get her name right? When she like thinks her dad is like just crazy. Like, he's been telling her about these conspiracies all his life. Like, she just wants to live her normal life as a high schooler. She's like, yeah, my dad is insanely paranoid. And then like it all turns out to be true and justified, and then she ends up seeing like how it's related to this sort of like larger structural injustice and like campaign to terrorize particular groups of people. And I feel like we see her undergo the like realization that what she thought was just kind of this like harebrained conspiracy is actually sort of like built into the structure of the nation that she lives in.
And to local Chicago talent Chase Infinity's credit, this realization happens beautifully and subtly over the course of the film. It is never drummed up as like a singular incidental break so much as it is like a gradual and mostly silent like realization and reconciliation of these things. And I think that her performance is one of the highlights of the movie for that reason. Yeah,
she does a really good job. I feel like there are several moments where you can just like see in her face that like something is kind of coming together for her. Like, for instance, when she's in the room with, I forget people's names, Sean Penn's character.
Commander Steve Lockjaw.
Yes.
You forgot that name?
Yeah. Another Pynchon-esque name. Yeah. When they're in the room together, and she's kind of having this realization that he had this affair with her mom, and realizing how sort of like horrible and racist he is. I feel like something is like sort of like clicking. You can like see something clicking in her head and in her like facial expressions.
Because she's framed in like an extreme close-up for like 80% of her scenes in the movie,
mm-hmm.
which I do feel like must be kind of terrifying, especially as like a younger, newer actor, that like, yeah, your face is the screen for a large part of the film.
But she did a great job. This whole movie was really well acted. I was really impressed by all the performances. I told you this, Patrick, but I enjoyed seeing Leonardo DiCaprio in like a somewhat likable character role. Not 100% likable, but has redeemable qualities, which I feel like it's been a minute since we've seen that from Leo.
What a good film.
Shout out to Steely Dan, who shows up in this film.
Steely Dan shows up a lot in this film.
Yeah. A reference and a needle drop. I've looked into this via Google. I've not found any confirmation that Thomas Pynchon listens to Steely Dan, but I do feel like there's significant connections in their sort of sardonic treatment of American depravity. And at the very least, there's an interview with Donald Fagen and Walter Becker where they mention reading Pynchon in college. So on some layer, the stencil connection board, the situation aligns.
There's a section in this chapter that we just read. I mean, obviously the Gaucho, but there's a line, like they say time after mind at one point in the line. And I was like, maybe this whole album is just based off this one chapter.
That was me listening to the Geese album recently, which has a song, Long Island City, Here I Come, has stuff. In anyways, we don't have to get all into it. Stay tuned for our Geese and Steely Dan listen through pod. More bonus content coming your way soon.
In which we take on impressions of different bands.
In which we take on impressions of different bands and ask ourselves whether or not they have read Thomas Pynchon. The Beatles in the studio in the Get Back recordings. Peter Jackson actually cut the part on where they were all talking about how much they really liked V and Crying of Lot 49. So yeah, maybe we'll wrap up our brief impressions there.
More to come later when we read Vineland.
More to come later when we read Vineland. As I understand it, the adaptation here, as the credits say, is more of an inspiration. Like a lot of this movie does come from stuff that Paul Thomas Anderson has been working with on his own for some time. But a lot of the basic setup of the ex-revolutionary sort of quadrangle of principal characters in this movie comes from Vineland. But if you liked this kind of thing, let us know, and perhaps it can be a more of a recurring conversation going forward. I don't really know how to end the not actual part.
See you
of the
later,
podcast.
alligator.
We already saw the alligators later. We'll see you later again.
Soon, baboon.
Yeah. See, there you go. Good one, Andrew.
Thanks. That's not an original. That's the full. See you later, alligator. After a while, crocodile. Soon, baboon.
I've never heard the Soon Baboon bit before, Andrew.
That's new to me. This is local flavor being injected. All right, we've stopped recording.
Yeah,
this is the end
good.
of the podcast. We're running out of steam.